There is a moment, every single morning, when the entire village is balanced on a knife's edge, not because of war, not because of kings, not because history is preparing to make one of the dramatic decisions that eventually fill our school books. No, the real deadline arrives far more quietly. It arrives with a slow fading of the stars. Because once the darkness begins to thin, every living thing, from the smallest mouse beneath the floorboards to the oldest grandmother warming stiff hands beside dying embers, must begin another negotiation with survival. For us, sunrise often feels like a beginning. For them, it is an appointment that cannot be missed. Miss it, and breakfast grows smaller. Miss it twice, and the field refuses forgiveness. Miss enough mornings, and winter quietly starts collecting your name months before the first snow ever falls. Tonight, though, we have no fields to rush toward, no heavy buckets waiting beside the well, no aching ox demanding harnesses before daylight. Instead, we can simply wander through the forgotten hours together. So settle into your blankets. Let your breathing slow. Imagine that the ceiling above you has disappeared, replaced by dark oak beams blackened by generations of smoke. The air smells different here. Not unpleasant. Simply alive. Wood ash hangs gently in every breath. Fresh straw releases a sweet, dusty scent. Somewhere nearby, drying herbs whisper faint fragrances of sage, rosemary, and thyme. A sheep's wool blanket scratches softly against your hands. The fire, nearly asleep itself, glows in quiet oranges beneath a blanket of gray ash. Outside, nothing seems to move, yet everything is already preparing. This is medieval Europe, not the glittering world of castles filled with banners and feasts, not the dramatic battlefields where armored knights charge beneath colorful flags. Those stories have already been told. Instead, tonight belongs to everyone whose names disappeared. The woman who baked 6,000 loaves of bread during her lifetime without anyone writing her name down. The boy who learned exactly how frozen mud feels beneath bare feet. The old carpenter who knew 20 different sounds that an oak tree could make before deciding where to swing his axe. History often forgets these people, but they built the world anyway. If you had wandered into almost any English village around the year 1250, perhaps with 20 or 30 families gathered around a small church, your first surprise would probably be the silence. Modern silence hardly exists. Our world hums constantly. Electricity buzzes. Engines rumble. Phones vibrate. Air conditioners whisper. Even at night, cities continue breathing through millions of invisible machines. A medieval village breathes differently. Listen carefully. The loudest sound may simply be wind slipping between wooden fences. Perhaps a horse shifts its weight inside a stable. Somewhere, an owl asks the darkness a question that receives no answer. The silence feels enormous, not empty, just spacious. Your ears slowly begin noticing details they usually ignore. The tiny crack of cooling timber, the distant trickle of water finding its way through a narrow stream, a dog sighing in its sleep, the soft rustle of mice exploring beneath loose floorboards. You realize something unexpected. Darkness here is truly dark. Without electric lights, the night sky stretches across the village with astonishing clarity. Thousands upon thousands of stars scatter themselves above every rooftop. The Milky Way is not a faint suggestion. It is a glowing river. Children grow up recognizing patterns among these stars long before they learn to read. Many adults cannot read a written sentence, but they can tell time by the heavens. They know where north waits. They know which season approaches simply by looking upward. The sky is not decoration. It is information. And information means survival. Now let us step quietly inside one ordinary house. Mind your head. The doorway is lower than you expect. Everyone here has learned to duck automatically. The building itself seems almost to have grown out of the earth. Thick wooden beams form its skeleton. Walls are woven from thin branches coated in a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. It sounds fragile. Oddly enough, it works remarkably well. The straw gives strength. The clay keeps out the wind. The mixture dries into surprisingly durable walls that can survive for years with occasional repairs. Nothing is wasted. Absolutely nothing. That may be the first great lesson of medieval life. Waste is expensive. Waste is dangerous. Waste eventually becomes hunger. A broken basket is repaired. A worn shirt becomes patches. The patches become cleaning cloths. The cloths eventually become fire starters. Ash from yesterday's fire helps clean cooking pots today. Animal bones become needles. Leather scraps become shoe repairs. Even old rope finds another purpose. Objects enjoy several lives before finally disappearing. You and I live among abundance. They lived among usefulness. There is a subtle difference. One encourages collecting. The other encourages caring. Near the center of the house burns the heart of everything. The hearth, not merely a fireplace, an entire universe. Here food cooks, water warms, stories travel from one generation to another. Children learn, tools dry after rain. Illnesses are watched through long nights. Arguments begin, arguments end. Courtships quietly bloom. Grandparents remember. The hearth gives more than heat. It gives gravity. Everything slowly circles around it. Smoke drifts upward toward a hole somewhere in the roof. Not all of it escapes. Much remains suspended inside the house. By modern standards, the air is unhealthy. Eyes sting sometimes. Lungs slowly collect years of soot. Yet smoke also protects. It discourages insects. It helps preserve hanging meat. It dries herbs suspended from rafters. It even darkens the timber, helping resist decay. Again, survival rarely offers perfect solutions, only workable ones. Perhaps that is another forgotten truth of history. Most people were not searching for ideal lives. They were searching for tomorrow. And tomorrow, most days, was enough. Look toward the sleeping family. Notice something surprising. Privacy barely exists. Several children sleep together beneath shared blankets. Parents rest only a few feet away. Perhaps an elderly grandmother occupies the warmest corner. Sometimes even small animals remain inside during especially cold nights. A chicken might flutter quietly. A lamb may sleep beside the doorway. Not because people enjoy crowded houses, because warmth is precious. Every warm body contributes. Heat escapes astonishingly fast through wooden walls and thatched roofs. Sharing warmth is simply mathematics. Human beings themselves become part of the heating system. Nobody explains this to children. They simply grow up understanding it. The unspoken rules of survival are rarely written down. They become habits instead. Tomorrow morning, before the sun has properly climbed above the fields, this peaceful room will transform into organized movement. Blankets folded, ash stirred, water fetched, bread prepared, animals fed, children assigned small responsibilities almost before they can speak clearly. Nobody rings a bell announcing work. The light itself becomes a signal, because daylight is limited. Candles cost money. Oil costs money. Firewood requires labor. Sunlight, however, asks for nothing except attention, which is why nearly every daily routine bends itself around the journey of the sun. Time belongs to nature, not clocks. In fact, mechanical clocks exist in some places. Large monasteries sometimes possess remarkable clock mechanisms. Certain wealthy towns proudly display public clocks. But ordinary villagers do not organize life by precise minutes. Instead, they think differently. After sunrise, before noon, when shadows reach the fence, as evening bells ring, after the cows return, time is experienced, not measured. That slower rhythm changes people in ways we rarely imagine, without constant awareness of exact minutes. Patience quietly grows. Waiting becomes ordinary. Bread rises when it rises. Rain ends when it ends. The seasons refuse negotiation. And perhaps, as we settle deeper into this peaceful medieval night, we begin to understand something gentle about these forgotten lives. They were harder than ours in countless ways. Colder, hungrier, far less certain. Yet they were also stitched tightly into the rhythms of the natural world. Every sunrise mattered. Every harvest mattered. Every loaf carried invisible hours of labor. Nothing appeared instantly. Everything arrived through time, whether muscle and hope. The first bird has begun to sing outside. Only one. Just a single careful note floating through the cool darkness. Soon another will answer. Then another. The village has not awakened yet. But morning has quietly placed its hand upon the world. And in our next chapter, we'll follow one ordinary family as they prepare for a day that seems completely ordinary, until we discover just how much quiet skill it takes simply to stay alive. The second bird does not answer immediately. It waits. There is a pause so long that you begin to wonder whether you imagine the first call at all. Then, from somewhere beyond the hedgerow, another note drifts across the damp morning air. A third follows. Soon the silence begins to unravel. Not suddenly, but thread by careful thread. This is how a medieval village wakes. Not with alarm clocks. Not with the buzz of notifications. Not with coffee machines humming in bright kitchens. Morning arrives like water slowly filling an empty bowl. Almost without noticing, everything changes. Stay very still for another moment. The air is colder now. During the night, moisture gathered on every blade of grass. Tiny droplets cling to spider webs stretched between fence posts, each one catching the faint gray light that now peaks over the eastern horizon. If you inhale deeply, you can almost taste the earth. It smells damp and rich, mixed with smoke that has never truly disappeared from yesterday's fire. There is a sharp scent of fresh manure from nearby animal pens. The sweet fragrance of crushed wild mint growing beside a narrow footpath. The clean smell of cold water moving over smooth stones in the little stream beyond the cottages. None of these scents have been bottled into perfumes. They simply exist together, announcing another ordinary day. Inside the cottage, no one wakes dramatically. There are no stretched arms accompanied by cheerful declarations of good morning. The first person to stir is the oldest woman. Her name will never appear in a royal record. No monk will copy it into an illuminated manuscript. History has forgotten her, but this morning she quietly saves breakfast. Without opening her eyes completely, she reaches toward the hearth. Her fingers know exactly where yesterday's ashes should be. She has performed this movement so many thousands of times that her hands no longer need instruction. She gently brushes away the cool gray as covering the center of the fire. Underneath, a miracle, tiny red embers still glow. Only a few, barely alive. To us, they might look insignificant. To her, they are worth protecting, because making fire from nothing is difficult. Keeping yesterday's fire alive is much easier. This small habit saves precious time. It saves labor. It saves tinder. Most importantly, it saves certainty. There is comfort in knowing warmth has survived the night. She kneels slowly, joints stiff from decades of work. Her knees protest. Her back aches before the day has even begun. She does not complain. Pain has become another weather pattern in her life. Present, expected, not worth discussing unless it suddenly disappears. She reaches for a handful of dry straw tucked carefully beneath a wooden bench. Not random straw. The driest pieces were intentionally saved yesterday afternoon. Even preparing for tomorrow's fire began yesterday. Survival is often nothing more than thinking one day ahead. She places the straw over the sleeping embers. Then she bends close. Not too close. Years of experience have taught her the exact distance. She breathes gently. A slow, patient stream of air. Nothing happens. She blows again. Still nothing. One more careful breath. Suddenly, orange, the smallest flame appears, trembling like a nervous guest. She does not rush it. Fire dislikes impatience. Tiny twigs come next, then slightly larger ones. Only later will thick logs join the growing blaze. Every child in the village understands this lesson before they are old enough to count. Small things must happen before large things become possible. Outside, another family is doing exactly the same thing. And another, across the village. Dozens of nearly identical fires awaken one after another. No one planned this together. Yet everyone follows the same invisible rhythm. It is a quiet kind of cooperation, not spoken, simply shared. The first crackling sounds begin drifting through open doorways. Thin columns of smoke rise into the cool morning sky. For someone standing on a nearby hill, the village would appear to be exhaling. Now another member of the household wakes. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old. Her blanket slips from one shoulder as she rubs sleep from her eyes. She does not ask for breakfast. She does not ask whether today is a holiday. She already knows the answer. Most days are not holidays. Most days are simply days. She sits up quietly, careful not to disturb the younger child sleeping beside her. Children here learn something very early. Noise has consequences. A crying baby may wake exhausted parents. A barking dog may disturb livestock. A slammed door wastes precious warmth. Being considerate is not merely good manners. It is practical. She reaches automatically for her simple wool tunic. It feels rough against her skin. Nothing about her clothing is soft by modern standards. The fabric scratches. The stitching is visible. Some patches are older than she is. Yet every repair tells a story. This tear happened while climbing an apple tree. That patch came from her father's worn-out sleeve. Another piece once belonged to her grandmother's winter cloak. Clothing is family history stitched together. A modern shirt might last 2 or 3 years. This little girl's tunic may contain cloth that has served the family for 20 years. Threads survive longer than memories. Soon the father rises. You hear him before you see him. A long sigh, then the quiet groan of muscles that never completely recovered from yesterday. Imagine spending every working day lifting stones, pulling plows, swinging axes, digging ditches, carrying water, walking miles across uneven fields. Now imagine doing that for 40 years. The body remembers every shovel, every winter, every harvest. His hands deserve special attention. They are maps. Thick calluses cover the palms. Small white scars cross his knuckles. Several fingernails are cracked. The skin around them is permanently stained by soil that no amount of washing can entirely remove. You can almost read his occupation without hearing a single word. Modern fingerprints identify people. In the Middle Ages, hands tell their biography. He stretches slowly before standing, not because someone taught him exercises, because experience taught him that moving too quickly invites injury, and injury is dangerous. There is no paid sick leave, no workers' compensation, no convenient pharmacy around the corner. A twisted ankle during planting season may mean fewer crops. Fewer crops mean less food. Less food means harder choices when winter arrives. Every movement has consequences that echo months into the future. This is something we sometimes forget. For medieval families, the future is never very far away. Today's work is already becoming next January's dinner. The youngest boy finally wakes. His hair points in every direction. He yawns so widely that everyone smiles despite themselves. For just a moment, the room feels timeless. Parents smiling at sleepy children. Children blinking at morning light. A grandmother pretending not to laugh. This scene could belong to almost any century. Some parts of being human never change. Love rarely appears in official records. Yet it quietly filled millions of ordinary mornings. Breakfast, however, is modest. Very modest. There are no towering stacks of pancakes. No sugary cereals. No fresh oranges from distant countries. Instead, yesterday's coarse bread is warm beside the fire. Perhaps a little oat porridge simmers in a blackened pot. If the family owns a cow, there may be a little milk. If chickens have been generous, perhaps an egg. If the previous autumn was kind, a spoonful of preserved apples or dried berries might brighten the meal. Every bite has traveled a long road. The grain was planted by hand, weeded by hand, harvested by hand, carried by hand, ground into flour between heavy millstones, mixed into dough, baked beside this very hearth. Nothing appears effortlessly. Even a simple slice of bread contains hundreds of hours of invisible labor. Perhaps that is why bread receives such respect. No one tosses it carelessly. Crumbs are gathered. Dropped pieces are picked up. Children are gently reminded not to waste even the smallest fragment, because someone, somewhere, spent entire seasons creating that single loaf. As the family eats, conversation remains quiet, not because they lack stories, because the day ahead is already waiting outside. The fields do not care how sleepy anyone feels. The animals are already hungry. The well still stands at the edge of the village. The sun has climbed another finger's width above the horizon. Its silent deadline has arrived once again. The world is asking every ordinary person the same simple question it has asked for thousands of years. The door opens with a slow wooden groan, not because it is haunted, not because it has been neglected, simply because oak, damp air, iron hinges, and 50 winters have all been quietly negotiating with one another for decades. The first breath of morning rushes inside. It is colder than the air around the hearth. The warmth from the fire slips eagerly toward the doorway, meeting the cool dawn halfway before disappearing into the village outside. Step through the doorway carefully. The threshold is worn smooth by thousands upon thousands of feet. Every scratch in the timber was made by someone carrying firewood, balancing buckets of water, returning from the field with aching shoulders, or hurrying home before a summer storm. No one ever intended to carve these marks. Time carved them instead, one ordinary footstep at a time. As your eyes adjust to morning light, the village slowly reveals itself. It is smaller than most people imagine. Perhaps 20 cottages, perhaps 40. Maybe a few more if the harvests have been kind for several years. The entire community could comfortably fit inside a modern apartment building. Everyone knows everyone, not just their names, their cough, their laugh, the rhythm of their footsteps, which child whistles while working, which dog always escapes its fence, which grandmother secretly leaves scraps of bread for wandering cats. Privacy, as we understand it today, barely exists. Life unfolds in full view of neighbors. This closeness has comforts. It also has consequences. If your chimney does not smoke one morning, someone notices. If your cow refuses to leave the barn, someone notices. If your child develops a fever, someone notices. News travels without newspapers, without telephones, without letters. Eyes carry information faster than horses. The lane beneath your feet is not paved. It is simply earth, hard-packed by countless journeys. In dry weather, it becomes dusty, coating shoes and hems with a pale brown powder. After rain, it transforms into thick mud that grips boots like stubborn hands. Wheel ruts from heavy carts filled with water. Children leap over puddles with surprising skill. Adults rarely bother. Their boots are already muddy. Mud is simply another companion. Notice something else. There are no straight lines. The lane curves gently around ancient trees. It bends around large stones too heavy to move. It follows the natural shape of the land rather than forcing the land to obey. Modern roads often declare victory over nature. This path feels more like a conversation. The village grew slowly. One cottage became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 20. Nobody unfolded a grand architectural plan. Instead, each generation added another small chapter. The result feels wonderfully imperfect, and somehow deeply alive. The first person you meet is already working. He is not young, nor particularly old, perhaps 45, though in this century, hard labor has added many extra years to his face. He carries 2 wooden buckets suspended from a smooth ash pole resting across his shoulders. The pole flexes gently with every step. Water inside the bucket sloshes softly, back and forth, back and forth. Listen to that sound. It may seem insignificant, yet this rhythm accompanies nearly every morning of his life. The village well lies only a few hundred steps away, but he will walk this journey again tomorrow, and the day after, and next year. Water is never simply available. It must always be fetched. You suddenly realize something astonishing. Every single cup of water used inside every house has been carried there by someone's muscles. Every pot washed, every soup prepared, every loaf baked, every face cleaned, every baby bathed, every shirt rinsed, every drop traveled by hand. A modern kitchen tap hides extraordinary engineering. A medieval bucket reveals extraordinary effort. The man smiles politely as he passes another villager. No lengthy conversation. Just a nod. Words are valuable too. There will be plenty of talking later. Morning belongs to movement. Ahead, 2 women kneel beside a narrow stream. Flat stones line the bank where generations have scrubbed clothing. The water is painfully cold, even during spring. Their hands move automatically. Soak, rub, beat the cloth gently against smooth stone. Rinse, twist, repeat. There is remarkable efficiency here. No movement is wasted. One woman laughs quietly. The other answers. The conversation drifts naturally between children, weather, planting, and an elderly neighbor recovering from illness. This stream serves another purpose beyond washing. It is also the village's morning newspaper. Information flows alongside the current. People rarely arrange meetings. They simply know where daily work will bring everyone together. The baker knows who needs flour. The shepherd hears who lost a chicken. The carpenter learns which roof leaked during last night's rain. Community grows from repeated encounters, not scheduled appointments. Further along the lane, a blacksmith's workshop already echoes with dull metallic sounds. Clang, pause, clang, pause. Not frantic, measured, patient. The forge glows orange despite the morning light. Inside, heat wraps around everything like a thick blanket. The blacksmith pumps enormous bellows made from leather and wood. Each slow push feeds fresh air into fire. The charcoal responds eagerly. Its colors shift from orange to brilliant yellow. Few people in the village possess skills quite like his. A broken plow can delay planting. A damaged horseshoe may slow travel. A snap knife complicates every meal. Metal is expensive. Every nail matters. Every hinge matters. Every iron tool carries tremendous value. Nothing here is disposable. If an iron knife breaks, no one throws it away. The blacksmith repairs it. Again and again, perhaps for decades. Objects are expected to grow old alongside their owners, not to be replaced at the first inconvenience. Outside the forge waits a young apprentice. He cannot be more than 12. His hands are blackened with soot. His eyebrows carry tiny flecks of ash. He watches every movement with astonishing concentration. There are no printed manuals explaining this trade. No online lessons. No instructional videos. Knowledge travels from one pair of hands to another. A mistake today becomes tomorrow's lesson. An observation repeated enough times becomes experience. Experience becomes mastery. Entire professions survive because someone was patient enough to watch. Nearby, the village carpenter examines a freshly cut oak plank. He runs rough fingertips across the grain, then closes his eyes for just a heartbeat, almost as though listening. And in a way, he is. Different would behave differently. Oak resists rot. Ash bends without breaking. Elm survives damp soil. Hazel makes excellent hurdles and woven fences. A skilled carpenter does not force wood into shapes it dislikes. He learns its personality first. Modern factories ask materials to obey. Medieval craftsmen often begin by asking what the material wants to become. There is wisdom hidden inside that approach, not only for wood, perhaps for people too. Beyond the cottages, the fields begin. They are not endless carpets of perfect green. Instead, they resemble a patchwork blanket stitched together over generations. Long, narrow strips stretch across the landscape. One family works this strip. Another works the next. There are very few fences separating them. Everyone understands where one family's responsibility ends and another begins. The boundaries exist mostly inside memory. Imagine trying to remember exactly which strip your grandfather farmed, which stone marked the corner, which old willow tree stood beside the path. Land is measured not only with eyes, but with stories. A father tells his son. The son tells his daughter. The daughter tells her grandchildren. Memory becomes a map. Walking along the edge of one field, you notice something unusual. Nobody appears hurried. Busy, certainly, but not rushed. That difference matters. The work is relentless, yet it follows rhythms that have remained almost unchanged for centuries. Seeds cannot be bullied into growing faster. Cows refuse to produce milk because someone is impatient. The weather ignores deadlines. Nature teaches an uncomfortable lesson every single day. Some things arrive only when their time has come. A flock of geese suddenly lifts from a nearby pond. Their wings beat the morning air with surprising force. Everyone glances upward, only briefly, then returns to work. Wildlife is not entertainment. It is information. Geese flying low may hint at changing weather. Crows gathering unusually might suggest freshly turned soil. Even birds become part of the village's quiet conversation with the land. you begin to notice that every ordinary person here carries invisible knowledge. The shepherd reads sheep. The miller reads grain. The beekeeper reads flowers. The herbal woman reads leaves. The fisherman reads water. None of them would describe themselves as scientists. Yet each has spent decades observing tiny patterns that determine whether families eat well or go hungry. Their textbooks are the seasons. Their examinations arrive every harvest. Their grades are measured in full granaries, or empty ones. As the sun climbs higher, golden light spills across the rooftops, warming the dew until it vanishes almost without notice. The village is fully awake now. Smoke curls from every chimney. Children's laughter mingles with the lowing of cattle. Hammers ring in the distance. Wheels creak. Dogs bark. Someone begins singing while hanging freshly washed linen. It is not a performance. Simply another way of making work feel lighter. Standing here, it becomes easy to understand why medieval villages endured for centuries. Not because life was easy, far from it, but because every person carried a small piece of everyone else's survival. The blacksmith needed the farmer needed the carpenter needed the shepherd needed the miller. No one stood alone for very long. The village itself was like a woven basket. Each strip of willow seemed ordinary by itself, but together they became strong enough to carry an entire community. And in our next chapter, we'll leave the lanes behind and follow the farmers into the open fields with a quiet science of medieval agriculture, and the constant gamble against weather, hunger, and time begins with the very first swing of a wooden plow. By the time the sun has climbed one hand's width above the horizon, the village is already emptying. Not completely. The very old remain behind. So do the youngest children, watched over by grandmothers whose wisdom has become more valuable than the strength of their backs. The blacksmith stays near his forge. The miller remains close to the turning wheel. But most everyone else begins drifting toward the fields. Not in one great crowd. In twos. In threes. Families walking familiar paths worn into the earth by hundreds of seasons. If you stand quietly at the edge of the village, you'll notice something remarkable. No one has to ask where they're going. Every foot already knows the journey. Imagine walking the same narrow path every spring, every summer, every autumn for 40 years. You will begin recognizing every stone beneath your boots, every crooked willow leaning over the ditch, every rabbit hole hidden in the tall grass. The landscape would stop being scenery. It will become memory. Morning sunlight stretches long shadows across the fields. Mist still clings stubbornly to the low places where cool air gathered overnight. The dew sparkles for only a few precious minutes before the warmth of the sun quietly erases it. No one stops to admire it. Beauty exists here, but survival comes first. There will be time to appreciate the sunrise only if today's work is finished before darkness returns. That is one of the strange truths of medieval life. Nature is breathtaking, but it is also your employer. The fields themselves look different from the farms many of us picture today. There are no enormous tractors waiting in neat rows. No irrigation system spraying perfect arcs of water. No bright green combines resting beside polished barns. Instead, the land is divided into long, narrow strips. Some belong to one family, others to another. Each strip seems impossibly small by modern standards. Yet together, they feed an entire village. At first glance, they appear untidy. One patch is barley, another oats, another beans. Beyond that lies a meadow where sheep have already begun grazing. There is method hiding inside this apparent disorder. Growing the same crop everywhere is dangerous. If disease strikes wheat, perhaps the barley survives. If one field produces poorly, another may compensate. Diversity is not fashionable. It is insurance. Centuries before anyone used words like risk management, medieval farmers practice it every season. Our family reaches their strip of land. The father pauses, not because he has forgotten what to do, but because every good farmer begins by looking. Really looking, he studies the color of the soil, the dampness left by yesterday's rain, the movement of clouds gathering far to the west. He crumbles a little earth between his fingers. Dark, moist, heavy, good. Perhaps today will be suitable for turning the soil. Perhaps tomorrow. The decision cannot be rushed. A single mistake echoes for months. Modern farming often relies on instruments and data collected by satellites. This farmer has only his senses. Yet those senses have been trained since childhood. He knows how wet soil should feel. He knows the smell of healthy earth. He notices tiny differences that someone unfamiliar with farming would completely miss. Knowledge does not always arrive in books. Sometimes it arrives through muddy boots. Nearby waits the village's greatest machine, the plow. To modernize, it seems surprisingly simple. Mostly wood, an iron tip fixed carefully at the front. Ropes, leather straps. Nothing gleams. Nothing hums. Yet this humble tool quietly changed European history. Without it, many heavy northern soils could never have been cultivated effectively. It does not merely scratch the surface. It cuts, lifts, turns, revealing darker earth that has not seen sunlight for months. But the plow has one important requirement. It cannot move itself. Two broad-shouldered oxen stand patiently nearby. Their breath rises in little white clouds during the cool morning. Massive heads sway slowly. Their ears flick lazily at persistent flies. Compared to horses, they seem almost sleepy. Yet appearances deceive. Oxen possess extraordinary strength. More importantly, they are reliable, patient, steady, exactly the qualities needed for long hours pulling heavy loads through stubborn earth. The father walks toward them carrying the wooden yoke. Notice how gently he speaks. His words are almost whispers, not because the animals understand every sentence, but because calm voices create calm movements. These oxen are not pets, nor are they machines. They are working partners. A frightened ox can destroy equipment. An injured one may cripple an entire harvest. Treating animals well is not sentimentality. It is practical wisdom. The wooden yoke settles across their broad shoulders. Leather straps are checked twice. A loose knot today could waste precious hours later. The father runs one rough hand along the neck of the older ox. Almost absent-mindedly, the animal leans slightly into the touch. They have worked together for years, perhaps a decade, perhaps longer. There is trust here, built not through affection alone, but through repetition. Thousands of mornings, thousands of furrows, thousands of quiet commands. The first pull begins. The oxen lean forward. The leather tightens. The wooden plow resists. For one long heartbeat, nothing happens. Then, the earth yields. The iron blade slips beneath the surface. A ribbon of dark soil rolls gently to one side. Fresh earth releases a rich, damp fragrance unlike anything found inside a city. It smells alive, deep, ancient. There is something almost comforting about it. Scientists today would tell us that healthy soil contains billions of tiny living organisms. The farmer knows none of those words. Yet he understands something equally important. Good soil has its own smell. And today, it smells promising. Walking behind a plow is exhausting work. The father grips the wooden handles firmly, guiding the blade with constant tiny adjustments. Every hidden root tries to pull it sideways. Every buried stone jars his arms. The handles vibrate with every uneven patch of ground. By midday, his shoulders will ache. By evening, his hands will feel as though they belong to someone twice his age. Still, he continues, one straight furrow after another. His son walks nearby, not yet strong enough to guide the plow. Instead, he watches. Sometimes he removes stones exposed by the turning earth. Sometimes he shoos away curious crows eager to steal worms from the fresh furrows. Mostly, he observes. Learning begins long before responsibility. Nobody hands him a written guide titled How to Become a Farmer. Instead, he absorbs thousands of tiny details. How deeply the blade should cut. How slowly the oxen should move. How to recognize soil that is too wet. How to repair a loose harness with a simple leather thong. Education here happens with muddy hands. A little farther away, the mother and daughter kneel among neat rows of beans. Their work appears gentle. It is anything but easy. Hour after hour, they bend over young plants, removing weeds one by one. Every unwanted plant competes for sunlight, for water, for precious nutrients hidden beneath the surface. A careless eye sees only green. An experienced one instantly separates friend from enemy. Their fingers move quickly. Pull, shake away the soil. Place the weeds into a basket. Repeat, thousands of times. You suddenly appreciate why medieval people rarely needed organized exercise. Daily survival exercised every muscle they possessed. Even children contribute, not because childhood is less valued, but because every pair of hands matters. A little boy carries a basket of seeds almost half his own size. He spills some, stops, carefully picks each one from the ground. His father nods with quiet approval. Those seeds are not merely seeds. They are future bread, future porridge, future winter meals. Nothing is too small to matter. Around midday, the work pauses, not because the fields are finished, only because bodies require fuel. The family gathers beneath the broad shade of an old oak tree standing alone at the edge of the field. Its branches spread like protective arms. This tree has watched generations come and go. Children once climbed its lower limbs. Those children became parents, then grandparents. The tree remembers none of their names, yet it has sheltered them all. Lunch is simple. A heel of coarse rye bread, a wedge of hard cheese, perhaps an onion, perhaps a handful of dried peas, a small flask of weak ale. To modern ears, giving ale to workers, even young ones, sounds surprising. But clean drinking water was not always available everywhere throughout the day, while weak ale was often safer because the brewing process reduced harmful microbes. It also contained much less alcohol than many modern beers, making it an everyday drink rather than a luxury. Nobody eats quickly, not because there is leisure, because this brief rest is precious. The father stretches his sore back against the rough bark. The mother closes her eyes for only a minute. The children lie in the cool grass, watching white clouds drift lazily overhead. For a few quiet moments, no one speaks. Words are unnecessary. The wind does enough talking. It rustles through barley like waves rolling across a distant sea. Bees wander from wildflower to wildflower with steady purpose. A skylark climbs impossibly high into the blue sky, singing so joyfully that you almost forget how difficult this life truly is. Perhaps that is one of the greatest surprises waiting for us in the Middle Ages. People did not spend every hour thinking about hardship. They laughed. They rested. They admired birds. They teased one another over lunch. They fell in love. They dreamed about better harvests. Life was undeniably harder than ours. Yet happiness still found small places to live. It tucked itself into shared meals beneath old trees, into children's laughter carried by the wind, into the satisfying sight of another straight furrow stretching toward the horizon. The afternoon still holds many hours of work. The sun has only reached the middle of its journey. There are more fields to tend, more weeds to pull, more seeds to protect. And above all, there is one invisible enemy that every farmer watches without ever taking her eyes off it. The weather, because tomorrow's rain or tomorrow's drought, can undo months of faithful labor in a single day. And in our next chapter, we'll look up from the earth to the ever-changing sky, discovering why medieval villagers watched the clouds with the same attention that we watch weather forecasts today. Long before anyone could check tomorrow's forecast on a glowing screen. Long before satellites drifted silently above the clouds. Long before maps filled with colorful bands of rain appeared at the touch of a finger. There was only the sky. And if you misunderstood what it was trying to tell you, the price could be measured in empty cupboards 6 months later. Stand with me at the edge of the field for just a little while. Do nothing. Simply look upward. At first, the sky seems almost too large. There are no skyscrapers interrupting your view. No telephone wires slicing neat lines across the horizon. No airplane trail stretching from one side of heaven to the other. Only an enormous blue dome resting gently upon the earth. It feels endless. Perhaps this is why medieval people spoke so often about heaven. When the sky dominates every waking day, it naturally becomes part of how you understand the world. The farmer is not staring upward because he is daydreaming. He is reading. The clouds are words. The wind is punctuation. The smell of the air is another sentence entirely. He notices details that most of us would walk straight past. The clouds this morning are thin, high, almost feathery. They drift slowly from the southwest. To you, they may simply look beautiful. To him, they begin a conversation. Will thicker clouds follow? Will rain arrive tomorrow? Or will these delicate streaks dissolve into another warm afternoon? He cannot know with certainty. No one can. But years of observation have taught him to recognize familiar patterns, not perfect patterns. Nature rarely repeats herself exactly, only rhythms. His grandfather noticed them. His father noticed them. Now he notices them too. Knowledge, once again, travels quietly from one generation to the next. There is something wonderfully humble about this way of living. No one believes they can control the weather. The greatest king in Europe cannot command the rain. The richest merchant cannot order the sun to shine. The poorest shepherd and the mightiest noble stand equal beneath approaching thunder. The sky reminds everyone that some things remain beyond human authority. A cool breeze brushes across the field. It lifts loose strands of the mother's hair beneath her linen veil. The barley ripples in soft waves. Even the oxen pause, raising their heavy heads. Animals often notice changes before people do. The old shepherd watches his sheep carefully, not because he suspects wolves, because sheep become restless before storms. Swallows begin flying lower when the air grows heavy with moisture. Cows sometimes gather together. Ants build higher mounds. Even bees return to their hives earlier than usual. No one here speaks of atmospheric pressure, yet they understand effects. The natural world whispers long before it shouts. Perhaps that is one reason medieval people seemed so patient. Listening requires stillness. Stillness requires time. Imagine spending your entire life depending upon signs that cannot be rushed. You would become observant almost without realizing it. You would notice the first yellow leaf of autumn, the first returning swallow of spring, the exact smell that rises from dry soil just before rain begins. Your senses will become finely tuned instruments. Our own senses still possess that ability. We simply ask them to notice different things. The glow of traffic lights, the vibration of a phone in our pocket, the sound of an incoming message. Neither way is entirely better, only different. A shadow passes overhead, not a cloud, a hawk. It circles high above the meadow in slow, effortless loops. Down below, a rabbit freezes completely. Its ears stand perfectly still. For nearly half a minute, the entire field seems to hold its breath. Then the hawk glides elsewhere. The rabbit disappears into tall grass. Life resumes. This tiny drama unfolds every day. Most people barely pause to watch. Predators hunt. Prey survives. Nature continues its ancient rhythm without applause. The medieval child walking beside you has seen this countless times. He understands something that no one formally taught him. Every creature must earn another day. That lesson is visible everywhere. A spider rebuilding a web torn by yesterday's wind. A robin carrying worms back to its nest. A fox following old trails through the woods at dusk. Survival is never guaranteed. Yet somehow, life keeps trying again. Clouds continue gathering through the afternoon. They are no longer delicate white streaks. Now they rise into tall gray towers along the western horizon. The old grandmother, who remained near the cottage this morning, would have noticed them too. She has lived through enough summers to recognize the shape of trouble. Storm clouds possess a certain weight, not only in appearance, in feeling. The air changes first. It becomes strangely quiet. Birdsong softens. Leaves stop fluttering. The world seems to wait. Then comes the smell. Have you ever noticed it? That rich, earthy scent drifting across dry ground just before rain begins. Today we know that rain can release compound from soil and plants into the air, creating that familiar fragrance. The villagers know none of the science. They simply smile. Rain is coming. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes they are not. Experience improves judgment. It never guarantees certainty. That uncertainty shapes every decision they make. Should they cut the hay today? Or risk leaving it another afternoon? Freshly cut hay ruined by rain may rot before winter. Harvest too early, however, and valuable nutrients are lost. There are no easy answers, only careful guesses. The farmer wipes sweat from his forehead, using the back of one rough hand. He glances west again, just for a heartbeat, then returns to work. What else can he do? The weather will arrive whether he worries or not. There is quiet wisdom hidden inside that acceptance, not resignation. Simply understanding the boundary between effort and control. Work diligently, prepare carefully, hope generously, accept what follows. These are not written laws, yet almost every villager lives by them. Across the fields, the sound of distant church bells drifts gently on the wind. 1, 2, 3 slow notes. Not everyone can read a written calendar, but everyone understands the bells. They mark time, call people to worship, warn of danger, celebrate weddings, mourn funerals. The bell tower becomes a village's shared heartbeat. Its sound reaches every field, every cottage, every lonely shepherd watching sheep upon distant hills. No message travels faster. The children stop working for a moment, counting each bell aloud, not because they need reminding of the hour, because children everywhere enjoy counting. Some pleasures belong to every century. A dragonfly darts across the edge of the field. Its transparent wings catch the sunlight like tiny pieces of colored glass. It lands briefly on the handle of the wooden plow, then vanishes again. No one chases it. No one photographs it. The moment simply exists, then passes. There is something peaceful about knowing not every beautiful thing must be captured to be remembered. As afternoon slowly leans toward evening, the clouds finally decide. A single cool drop lands upon the father's wrist. Another darkens the dusty path. Then another. The family does not panic. Neither do the neighbors. This is not a violent storm, only a gentle summer shower. Tools are gathered. Oxen are turned toward home. Bundles of herbs are covered with coarse linen cloth. Children laugh as the rain begins spotting their sleeves. Within minutes, the dry earth drinks deeply. The smell rising from the fields becomes richer than ever. Fresh, clean, almost sweet. Every growing plant seems to sigh with relief. The farmer lifts his face toward the rain for just a moment, his eyes close. He does not speak. He does not need to. Sometimes gratitude is quieter than words. Together, the villagers begin walking home along the muddy lanes, their boots leaving fresh prints that tomorrow's sunshine will slowly erase. Behind them, the fields glisten beneath the soft rain. Ahead of them, thin columns of chimney smoke rise once again into the cooling evening air. The hardest part of the working day is ending, but another important chapter of medieval life is only just beginning, because once the tools are put away and animals are fed, the village gathers around the warm glow of the hearth, a place where bread, stories, songs, and memories are shared, and where the darkness outside feels just a little less lonely. In our next chapter, we'll step back inside those smoke-darkened cottages to discover why the evening hearth was the true heart of medieval family life, and why some of the greatest stories in history were never written down at all. By the time the last light slips behind the distant hills, the village begins shrinking, not in size, in sound. The fields empty one family at a time. The blacksmith lets his forge cool until its fierce orange glow softens into sleepy red. The mill wheel turns a little slower as the stream catches the fading light. The shepherd gathers his flock with quiet whistles that the sheep have known since they were lambs. Even the birds seem to understand that another chapter of the day is gently folding itself closed. The path home feels different from the path out. This morning, everyone walked with energy still tucked safely inside tired muscles. Now every step carries the weight of a day's labor. Boots are heavier with dried mud. Hands are rougher. Shoulders ache in familiar places. Yet no one seems surprised by the fatigue. It is simply the evening collecting payment for the daylight it offered. Walk beside the family once more. Listen carefully. They are not talking very much. Not because they are unhappy, because the silence has become comfortable. There is a kind of friendship that requires constant conversation. And there is another kind, perhaps deeper, that is content simply to share the same road. The father adjusts a bundle of wooden tools balanced across one shoulder. The mother carries a woven basket now nearly empty, except for a small bunch of onions and a handful of herbs gathered along the edge of the field. The children walk ahead, occasionally chasing one another despite their tired legs. Somehow, children always seem capable of discovering one last burst of energy just before bedtime. The grandmother smiles. She remembers doing exactly the same thing 70 years ago. Nothing about that has changed. As the cottages come into view, thin ribbons of smoke curl upward from nearly every roof. The entire village smells different now than it did this morning. Breakfast smoke has given way to supper smoke. The scent is richer, more comforting. Someone nearby is baking oatcakes. Another family has cabbage simmering in a black iron pot. You catch the faint aroma of leeks, onions, and herbs drifting together in the cool evening air. A little farther away comes the unmistakable smell of fresh bread. Real bread. Dark, dense, still warm from the oven. No expensive perfume could compete with that fragrance. To hungry villagers, it is the smell of another successful day. Before anyone sits down to eat, however, there is still work to finish. The animals come first. Always, the oxen are led carefully into their shelter. Their heavy yokes are removed. One animal shakes its enormous head with obvious relief. The father laughs softly. You earned your rest. Perhaps he says those words aloud. Perhaps only in his heart. Either way, he means them. A bucket of fresh water is placed before them. Hay follows. The animals begin chewing immediately with slow, steady satisfaction. There's something almost hypnotic about the rhythm. Chew. Pause. Chew again. Nearby, chickens fuss noisily as they settle onto wooden perches for night. One stubborn hen refuses to cooperate. She wanders beneath a cart instead. The youngest boy crawls after her. For several amusing minutes, the entire family watches a determined child try to outsmart an equally determined chicken. Eventually, the chicken loses, though she seems convinced she won. Laughter ripples across the yard. These tiny moments rarely appear in history books. No medieval chronicler ever wrote. Today, little Thomas chased an exceptionally stubborn hen. Yet scenes like this probably happen thousands of times every evening across Europe. Ordinary life has always contained extraordinary humor. Now let us step back inside the cottage. Immediately, warmth wraps itself around you. The fire has grown stronger since morning. Its orange light dances across rough wooden beams, stained almost black from years of smoke. The room glows rather than shines. Every shadow feels soft around the edges. Modern homes are bright. This cottage is gentle. The fire becomes the evening sun after the real one has disappeared. The grandmother places another split log onto the hearth. Tiny sparks leap upward like a swarm of glowing insects before disappearing into the darkness above. She watches carefully. Fire is never ignored. It demands respect every hour of its life. Too little wood, and the family shivers. Too much, and valuable fuel disappears unnecessarily. Even feeding a fire requires judgment. A large iron pot already hangs above the flames. Inside, supper bubbles quietly. If you lean closer, you hear tiny popping sounds as vegetables soften in the broth. Steam carries the comforting scent of onions, barley, cabbage, and a few precious herbs gathered earlier that afternoon. Perhaps there is a small piece of salted pork floating inside. Perhaps not. Many families ate meat only occasionally. The soup changes with the seasons. Spring brings fresh greens. Summer offers peas and beans. Autumn contributes root vegetables. Winter asks everyone to rely on what was wisely preserved months before. The recipe is never exactly the same. The principle always is, use what the earth offers. Waste nothing. As supper cooks, another quiet ritual begins. Boots come off, not tossed carelessly. Placed near the fire where damp leather may slowly dry overnight. The father examines one sole. A stitch has loosened. He reaches for a simple bone needle and wax thread. There is no question of buying new boots. These have many years left to serve. If cared for, repair is simply part of ownership. Imagine how different our homes might look if every broken object received the same patience. Across the room, the mother mends clothing by firelight. Her needle moves with astonishing confidence. She scarcely looks down. Her fingers already know the distance between each stitch. The little girl sits beside her holding a basket of colorful scraps. Well, colorful by medieval standards. Soft browns, faded reds, muted blues dyed years ago with woad or madder. Each tiny piece waits for another purpose. Nothing is discarded until it is given absolutely everything it can. The youngest boy has his own important responsibility. He gathers loose with shavings and kindling into a neat bundle for tomorrow morning. Notice that word again. Tomorrow. Nearly every evening task quietly prepares for the next day. Life moves in circles rather than straight lines. Today's work protects tomorrow. Tomorrow's work protects winter. Winter's careful habits protect spring. Everything connects. Now the bowls are filled. Simple wooden bowls. Each one slightly different because each was carved by hand. No two are perfectly alike. The family gathers around the hearth. There is no grand dining table. No elaborate ceremony. Everyone simply settles wherever warmth is greatest. For a little while, no one speaks. They are hungry. The first spoonful of hot soup feels almost miraculous after hours in the cool evening air. Steam rises gently before disappearing into the smoky rafters. The broth is plain, yet nourishing. The barley is soft. The cabbage sweetened by slow cooking. The herbs brighten every bite. You suddenly realize something. When you spend an entire day working with your body, simple food becomes extraordinary. There is no need for complicated flavors. Hunger itself is the finest seasoning. The children dip coarse bread into the soup until it soaks up every last drop. Not a crumb is wasted. Even the wooden spoons are carefully scraped against the bowls. Clean bowls mean less washing. Less washing means less water carried from the well. Again, everything connects. As the meal ends, conversation finally begins to bloom. The father mentions a loose fence near the eastern pasture. The mother wonders whether tomorrow will remain cool enough for baking. The grandmother remembers another summer long ago, when rain arrived at just the right moment. The children interrupt occasionally with stories of frogs, dragonflies, and a rabbit that nearly startled them into dropping a basket of beans. No one tells them to be quiet. Children's stories matter too. Then, something beautiful happens. No one announces it. It simply begins. The grandmother starts telling a story. Not reading one. There is no book resting in her lap. Books are precious and exceedingly rare. Most ordinary villagers will never own one. Instead, the story lives inside her memory. It has traveled across decades without ink. Perhaps her own grandmother told it during another rainy evening, beside another fire. Perhaps it is older still, older than the village, older than the kingdom. It tells of a clever fox who tricks a greedy wolf, of a foolish giant frightened by his own shadow, of a traveler who discovers that kindness given freely often returns in unexpected ways. The children lean closer. Even the father smiles. He already knows every twist in the tale. That hardly matters. Some stories are not enjoyed because we wonder what happens next. They are loved because they remind us who we are. The fire crackles softly as the grandmother's voice rises and falls. Outside, darkness settles completely over the village. The stars return one by one. Inside, the cottage has become its own tiny world. Warm, safe, filled with laughter, memory, and stories that no monk will ever write into a manuscript. And yet, without evenings like these, the Middle Ages would never have survived, because kingdoms are held together by laws, but families are held together by stories. And tomorrow, as the first light returns once more, we'll leave the warmth of the hearth and follow the women of the village through a day of work that history too often overlooks, discovering that while the men plowed the fields, it was the women who quietly kept the entire rhythm of medieval life from falling apart. The village is still asleep, or at least, that is what it looks like. The stars have only just begun to fade. A pale silver line rests low along the eastern horizon, where the sun is still patiently waiting for its turn. The rooster has not crowed. The blacksmith's forge is cold. Even the dogs have curled themselves into quiet circles beneath carts and wooden benches. If you were standing here for the first time, you might think nothing had begun, but behind one small cottage door, someone is already awake. Not because she wants to be, because the day has quietly arrived before anyone else noticed. The woman opens her eyes without stretching, without lingering beneath the blanket. There is no luxury of deciding whether to sleep another 10 minutes. The fire needs waking. The bread dough needs checking. Water must be carried. The children will soon be hungry. The chickens are already waiting. Long before the rest of the village begins moving, her work has already started. History is often described the Middle Ages through kings, bishops, soldiers, and castles. Yet if you removed every ordinary woman from a medieval village, the entire community would stop functioning before the week was over. Food would disappear. Children would be neglected. Clothing would slowly fall apart. Water would not reach the hearth. Seeds would not be preserved. Illnesses would spread more quickly. The rhythm holding daily life together would quietly unravel. Their work was everywhere, which is precisely why it often became invisible. When something is done every single day, people eventually stop noticing it. But let us notice, very carefully, the woman kneels beside yesterday's embers, just as a grandmother did. Only today, you pay closer attention. Her hands move with astonishing confidence. She does not search for the driest straw. She already knows exactly where she stored it yesterday evening. Preparation is one of her greatest skills, not because anyone praises it, because tomorrow constantly arrives. The tiny flame catches. A kettle is suspended above the growing fire. Soon the gentle sound of warming water fills the cottage. It is not a loud sound, more like a quiet promise. Another day has officially begun. Outside, she lifts 2 wooden buckets. Empty, they seem manageable. Filled, each will weigh more than 20 pounds. She balances them using a smooth, carrying pole across her shoulders. The wood has been polished by years of use, not through careful sanding, through thousands of journeys to the well. Step outside with her. The air feels wonderfully cool against your face. Mist floats low above the fields like thin white silk. Every blade of grass sparkles with dew. A spider web stretches between 2 fence posts, decorated with hundreds of tiny droplets reflecting the first hints of dawn. She notices none of this, not because beauty escapes her, because she has seen it every morning since childhood. Familiar wonders often become invisible. The path toward the village is already occupied, not crowded, simply alive. 3 other women are walking in the same direction. No one arranged this meeting. It happens naturally every morning. The well is more than a source of water. It is the village's first conversation of the day. One woman asks quietly about an elderly neighbor whose cough worsened overnight. Another shares that her youngest son has finally begun walking without stumbling. Someone else mentions seeing fox tracks near the chicken coop before sunrise. These are not idle conversations. This is how a community keeps itself informed. Long before newspapers, long before radio, long before neighborhood message groups. There was the well. The stone circle surrounding it had become smooth after generations of hands rested upon its edge. The wooden bucket disappears into darkness. A heartbeat later, splash, the rope tightens. Water is surprisingly heavy. The women pull together almost without thinking. One braces a rope. Another steadies a bucket. A third helps lift it over the edge. Nobody announces, "I'll help." They simply do. Some habits become so deeply woven into daily life that kindness feels as natural as breathing. Fresh water catches the first rays of sunrise. Its surface shines like polished glass, cold enough to numb fingers, clear enough to reflect the waking sky. Every drop carried home this morning will soon become soup, tea made from herbs, bread dough, clean bowls, washed faces, comfort for a feverish child. Water is never just water. It is possibility. The journey home is slower, not because the women are tired, because full buckets demand respect. Walk too quickly, and the water sloshes over the rim. Each spilled cup represents another unnecessary trip. The physics of survival appear everywhere. Balance saves effort. Patience saves strength. Inside the cottage, the children are beginning to wake. The little boy rubs sleepy eyes before wandering toward the fire. His hair resembles a bird's nest after a windy night. His older sister giggles. Their mother smiles despite herself. Some scenes belong equally to every century. She hands a girl a small wooden bowl. Stir. Only one word. No long explanation. The child already understands. Responsibility enters life gradually, not as punishment, as participation. The spoon circles through thickening porridge. Slowly, carefully, she has practiced enough times to avoid spilling. Children here are rarely treated as helpless. Instead, each new year quietly brings another useful task. At 5, perhaps gathering eggs. At 7, watching younger siblings for short periods. At 10, helping in the fields. Learning happens through doing, not through lectures. After breakfast comes bread. Real bread making begins long before flour touches water. Yesterday's sourdough starter has been sleeping beneath a damp cloth. Lift the cloth gently. There it is, alive. Tiny bubbles have formed overnight. Invisible yeast has been working faithfully while everyone slept. The woman smiles. This is good. A healthy starter means reliable bread. She adds fresh flour milled only days earlier. Then warm water, a pinch of precious salt. Nothing more. The ingredients seem almost unbelievably simple. Yet what follows borders on magic. She presses both hands into the sticky mixture. Fold, turn, press again. The dough slowly changes beneath her palms. Too wet? Add a little flour. Too dry? A splash more water. No measuring cups. No kitchen scales. Experience has become measurement. Her hands recognize the correct texture long before words could describe it. Imagine repeating this process every week for 40 years. How many loaves would that be? Perhaps 6,000. Perhaps 10,000. Each one slightly different. Each one feeding the people she loves. No historian records such numbers, yet they represent a lifetime of quiet achievement. Nearby, another woman spins wool. She pulls soft fibers from a bundle resting beside her chair. One hand gently feeds the wool. The other twists a spindle with practiced fingers. Round and round it turns. The loose fibers become thread. The thread will become cloth. The cloth will become shirts, blankets, stockings, perhaps a wedding garment someday. The entire transformation begins with patient hands moving in circles. It is slow work, beautifully slow. The spindle hums softly as it spins. The sound blends with crackling firewood and distant birdsong. The cottage seems filled with tiny rhythms, none of them hurried, all of them necessary. Later, she carries a basket into a small garden behind the house. Do not imagine perfectly trimmed flower beds. This garden is practical. Cabbages stand in neat rows. Leeks sway gently in the breeze. Beans climb rough wooden poles. Parsley, sage, thyme, and mint release their fragrance as she brushes past. These herbs flavor meals, ease stomach aches, soothe sore throats, help preserve food. Many medieval women possessed remarkable knowledge of plants. They knew which leaves reduced swelling, which roots settled an upset stomach, which flowers attracted helpful bees. Some of this knowledge had been passed down for generations. Some had been learned through painful trial and error. Not every remedy worked. Some certainly did. Knowledge grew one observation at a time. As the morning unfolds, she scarcely sits down. A shirt needs mending. A toddler falls and scrapes a knee. Eggs must be collected before a curious fox decides to help himself. Cheese hung yesterday needs checking. Beans soaking in a clay pot must be stirred. Ash from the hearth is saved for cleaning. Nothing happens by accident. Every smooth-running household is supported by hundreds of tiny decisions that almost no one notices. Perhaps that is the truest measure of skill. When everything works so well that people assume it simply happens. By midday, the village feels fully alive once again. Children's laughter drifts through open doorways. The blacksmith's hammer rings steadily across the lane. A dog naps in a patch of warm sunlight. Fresh bread cools on wooden racks beside open windows. The smell alone is enough to make anyone hungry. And as you watch these ordinary women move from one task to another with calm, practiced confidence, you begin to understand something history too often whispers instead of saying aloud. The Middle Ages were not sustained only by strong arms in the fields. They were sustained just as much by steady hands beside the hearth, by people whose names were never written into books, but whose work filled every loaf, every blanket, every healed child, and every warm home. In our next chapter, we'll follow the children of the village, discovering that childhood in the Middle Ages was filled with work, but also with games, curiosity, friendships, and small adventures that would still feel surprisingly familiar to us today. There is a curious moment in every medieval village, a brief stretch of the morning, when the adults become so completely absorbed in their work that the children seem to disappear, not because they have wandered far, not because anyone has forgotten them, but because children possess a remarkable talent that has survived every century. They know how to build entire worlds from almost nothing. Walk quietly toward the edge of the village. Do not announce yourself. Children rarely stop playing because they are tired. They stop because they realize someone is watching. Ahead, beneath an old ash tree whose roots twist above the ground like sleeping snakes, 5 children have gathered. The oldest may be 12. The youngest no more than 4. No one has organized them. There is no teacher. No schedule pinned to a wall. No whistle announcing the beginning of play. They simply found one another, just as children have always done. The oldest girl is holding what appears to be a magnificent horse. Look closer. It is only a stick, a crooked branch with a fork at one end. Yet in her imagination, it has become the finest stallion in England. She gallops proudly around the tree while the younger children cheer. No one points out that the horse is made of wood. That would miss the point entirely. Imagination has always been one of humanity's least expensive luxuries, and perhaps its most valuable. Nearby, 2 boys are constructing a tiny village from pebbles, bits of bark, and handfuls of damp earth. A larger stone becomes a church. Small twigs become fences. Acorns stand in for cattle. One carefully shaped lump of clay represents the village baker. The smallest boy accidentally knocks everything over with one enthusiastic step. For a heartbeat, silence. You expect tears. Instead, everyone laughs. Then they begin building again. Children recover from ruined worlds far more quickly than adults. Perhaps there is a lesson hidden there. A little farther away, 3 girls kneel in the grass weaving daisies into simple crowns. Their fingers move slowly, patiently. One flower, then another. Thin stems loop together. A circle begins to form. No one has taught them through written instructions. An older sister demonstrated once, perhaps twice. The rest came through practice. One girl gently places a finished crown upon the youngest child's head. She beams with quiet pride. For a few wonderful minutes, she is a queen, not because she rules anyone, because someone made something beautiful just for her. Across the meadow, a group of boys has discovered a shallow stream. Immediately, it becomes the greatest river in the known world. Tiny boats carved from bark are launched into the current. Each carries a leaf for a sail. The race begins. The children sprint alongside the water, cheering wildly as their little ships dodge stones and swirl through miniature whirlpools. One boat becomes trapped beneath a fallen branch. Its owner immediately jumps into the icy water. His shoes are soaked. His trousers are muddy. He emerges victorious, holding the rescue boat high above his head. His friends applaud as though he has returned from a voyage across the ocean. Adventure requires very little equipment, only curiosity. Notice something about their games. Almost every one of them quietly prepares the children for adult life. Building miniature villages teaches observation. Throwing smooth stones develops coordination. Climbing trees strengthens muscles. Playing house allows children to imitate the work they see every day. Even pretending has purpose. No one designed these games with education in mind. Life itself did. The older children naturally watch over the younger ones. Not constantly, not sternly, simply as part of the rhythm of the day. If the smallest child wanders too close to the stream, an older sister gently guides him back. If someone falls while climbing a fence, an older brother reaches out a hand. Responsibility arrives gradually here, like sunrise, almost too slowly to notice. Around the edge of the meadow, wild blackberry bushes have begun producing fruit. Not many, only a few early berries. The children discover them almost immediately. Their fingers become stained deep purple. So do their lips. The youngest proudly holds up a berry no larger than the tip of his thumb, as though he has discovered buried treasure. In a way, he has. Sweet things are precious. especially those offered freely by the countryside. One little girl quietly saves 2 berries in the corner of her apron, not for herself, for her grandmother. She knows her grandmother loves blackberries, but walks too slowly now to gather them. No one asked her to do this. Kindness often begins as observation. She simply noticed. Children, when trusted, often become wonderfully thoughtful. As the sun climbs higher, another lesson begins. Work, not as punishment, not as the end of childhood, simply as another part of life. The oldest boy carries a small basket toward the chicken yard. His task is collecting eggs. He moves carefully, too quickly, and the hens become nervous. Too roughly, and breakfast becomes tomorrow's disappointment. He reaches beneath warm feathers. 1 egg, then another, each still pleasantly warm from the nest. He places them gently into the basket as though handling tiny treasures. Because that is exactly what they are. Nearby, 2 sisters help spread freshly washed linen across low bushes and wooden lines. The breeze catches each cloth, turning simple shirts into white sails. They giggle as one sleeve wraps itself around the younger girl's face. Even chores occasionally choose to become games. A little later, the children accompany their mother into the herb garden. She points towards several familiar plants. This one, the oldest girl answers immediately. Sage. And this, mint. The lesson continues. Not inside a classroom. Standing barefoot on warm earth, the children rub leaves between their fingers. They smell them, taste tiny pieces when invited. Some herb-seasoned soup. Others soothe coughs. A few help clean wounds. Knowledge enters through every sense, not only the eyes. No one expects the children to memorize everything today. Tomorrow, they will see the same plants. And the day after, learning grows like the herbs themselves, a little each season. Near midday, the church bell rings softly across the village. Its sound floats above rooftops and field alike. The children stop what they are doing, not because someone ordered them to, because the bell has become part of the rhythm of their lives since birth. Some cross themselves quietly. Others simply pause for a moment before returning to their work. The bell marks more than time. It reminds everyone that they belong to something larger than themselves. The village, the season, the passing years. As the afternoon grows warmer, the children seek shade beneath the great oak at the edge of the meadow. An elderly man is already sitting there. His beard is as white as sheep's wool. One leg no longer bends easily after an old injury. Heavy field work is mostly behind him now, but his usefulness is not ended. Far from it. Children gather around him almost automatically. They know what comes next. A riddle. He smiles. I have towns without people, rivers without water, and forests without trees. What am I? The children frown. They whisper guesses. A basket? A dream? The oldest girl suddenly laughs. A map? The old man nods. Exactly. Perhaps the riddle itself is newer than the Middle Ages. But the tradition of elders challenging young minds with riddles, wordplay, and clever questions reaches back through many centuries. It sharpens memory, observation, and imagination, all while bringing generations together. Then he tells them about a fox clever enough to trick a wolf into chasing its own reflection in a frozen pond. The children know the story already. That hardly matters. They laugh at exactly the same places they laughed last winter. And they will probably laugh again next winter. Some stories become old friends. You never grow tired of visiting them. The afternoon slowly begins leaning toward evening. The shadows beneath the trees stretch a little farther across the grass. Parents begin calling softly from nearby cottages. Not shouting. Simply calling names carried gently by the breeze. One by one, the children answer. One runs home carrying eggs. Another balances a bundle of kindling on his shoulder. A little girl still wears her daisy crown, though several flowers have already begun to wilt. Tomorrow, the crown will be gone. But today's happiness will quietly settle into memory. Watching them disappear down the winding lanes, you realize something comforting. Childhood has changed in many ways across the centuries, yet in other ways, hardly at all. Children still invent impossible adventures, still collect small treasures, still laugh when someone slips in the mud, still ask endless questions, still want someone older to tell them one more story before bedtime. The toys are different. The world is different. But the wonder remains beautifully familiar. And in our next chapter, we'll step into one of the busiest places in the entire village, the mill, where simple grains of wheat, rye, and barley begin a remarkable journey that transforms months of patient labor into the humble loaf of bread waiting beside every medieval hearth. If the fields decided whether the village would survive, the mill decided whether the village could eat. It is an ordinary building, almost disappointingly ordinary. No towering walls, no carved stone statues, no colorful banners fluttering proudly in the breeze. Yet if this simple wooden structure vanished tomorrow morning, every family in the village would feel its absence before the week was over. Bread begins here, not in the oven, not in the kitchen, but beside moving water. Walk with me along the narrow footpath, leading away from the cottages. The sound reaches you before the building appears. A soft, steady rushing, water slipping over rounded stones. Not loud, not dramatic, simply constant. The stream has been singing the same quiet song for centuries. It sang before the village existed. It will probably continue long after everyone living here has been forgotten. As you round a bend lined with alder trees, the mill finally comes into view. The roof is thick with weathered thatch. Its wooden walls lean just slightly, as though the building itself has spent decades listening to the stream. Beside it stands a great water wheel. Slowly, patiently, it turns. Each heavy paddle disappears beneath the flowing water before emerging again, dripping silver in the morning light. Round and round, hour after hour, day after day. It never seems hurried, and yet its steady movement quietly transforms the entire harvest. Pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Listen. The splash of water against the wheel. The gentle groan of wooden beams. The low rumble of enormous millstones turning somewhere inside. A pigeon coos from the roof. Wind whispers through reeds growing beside the bank. There are no engines, no electric motors, only gravity. The stream falls downhill exactly as it has since the last ice age. The villagers have simply learned to borrow a little of its endless journey. There is something wonderfully humble about that. They are not conquering nature. They are cooperating with it. Outside the mill, several farmers have already gathered. Each carries a coarse linen sack filled with grain, barley, rye, oats, sometimes wheat, if the harvest has been especially kind. The sacks are heavier than they appear. One man shifts his burden from one shoulder to the other with a quiet sigh. Months of work now rest inside that rough cloth. Spring planting, summer weeding, autumn harvesting, drying, threshing, winnowing. Every season has contributed to this single bag of grain. It contains far more than food. It contains time. The miller greets everyone with an easy smile. He knows every family, knows whose youngest daughter recently recovered from a fever, knows which farmer lost an ox last winter, knows who is expecting a child before the leaves begin falling again. The mill is not only a workplace, it is another gathering place, another quiet center of village life. Step inside. The air changes immediately. Outside, everything smelled of damp earth and flowing water. Inside, it smells warm, nutty, dusty. Fresh grain fills every breath. Tiny particles of flour float through beams of sunlight, streaming between gaps in the wooden walls. They drift so gently that the air itself seems alive. The room hums with movement. Above your head, enormous wooden gears slowly turn. Each tooth meshes perfectly with the next. No metal bearings, no modern engineering software, just generations of careful craftsmanship. The gears speak in soft wooden voices. Click, groan, turn, click again. Every sound has meaning. The miller listens almost without realizing it. If one gear begins making an unfamiliar noise, he notices immediately. Machines speak to those who know how to listen. At the heart of the building lie the millstones, two enormous circles of carefully shaped stone. The lower stone remains still. The upper one rotates steadily. Grain slips through a small opening at the center. Then something extraordinary happens. The hard kernels disappear between the stones. A heartbeat later, soft flour begins spilling gently from the edges. White, warm, almost silky between your fingers. To a child seeing this for the first time, it might feel like magic. In truth, it is patient physics. Pressure, friction, carefully balanced weight. The villagers know none of these scientific terms, yet they understand something equally valuable. The stones must not turn too quickly. Too much speed overheats the flour. Too slowly, and the work wastes precious daylight. The gap between the stones must be adjusted constantly. Too close, and the flour becomes scorched. Too far apart, and whole grains escape untouched. The miller reaches beneath the machine every few minutes. He rubs a pinch of fresh flour between thumb and finger. Too coarse? He adjusts the stones. Too fine? Another small correction. Notice how tiny the changes are. Barely visible. Mastery often lives in the smallest adjustments. A young apprentice watches everything. Perhaps he is 13. Perhaps 14. His hair and eyebrows have turned almost white with flour dust. He sneezes suddenly. The miller laughs. You'll get used to it. Maybe he says those exact words. Maybe not. But every apprentice throughout history has heard something very similar. The boy's real education is not happening through lectures. It happens through observation. He learns the sound of healthy gears, the smell of overheated grain, the feel of properly ground flour. One day, without quite noticing when, his hands will begin making the same quiet adjustments as confidently as his teachers. Outside the building, something catches your attention. Several sparrows hop busily beneath a wooden platform. Tiny grains have spilled during unloading. The birds waste nothing. Neither do the villagers. After milling is finished, the remaining bran may feed pigs. Some becomes animal fodder. Nothing useful is allowed to disappear carelessly. Waste remains the one luxury no one can afford. Near the doorway sits an elderly woman carrying a small basket. Inside rests only a few handfuls of grain, not enough to justify a long journey by itself, but enough for tomorrow's bread. She waits patiently. No one complains. Everyone understands. Her needs matter too. In a small village, fairness is not merely kindness. It is survival. The rhythm of the mill continues throughout the morning. A sack arrives. Grain pours into the hopper. The wheel turns. The stones sing. Fresh flour falls into waiting baskets. Again and again, the work feels almost hypnotic. You begin to understand why medieval people often experience time differently than we do. Many of their tasks followed repeating rhythms. Spin, grind, knead, sow, harvest, repeat. Life was not monotonous. It was cyclical. Each season returned carrying familiar work. Not identical, but comfortably recognizable. Around midday, the miller pauses for only a few moments. He wipes flour from his beard using the back of one hand. It hardly helps. Within minutes, a fine white dust settles there once more. His lunch is simple. A piece of dark bread, a slice of cheese, an apple saved carefully from autumn storage. He sits beside the stream while eating. The water wheel continues turning behind him. It never stops simply because someone feels hungry. The stream keeps working, day and night, rain or sunshine, summer warmth or winter frost. Nature has remarkable patience. Perhaps that is why people who live closely beside it often become patient themselves. As the afternoon light softens, the last sacks of grain are loaded onto waiting shoulders. Only now they are lighter. Grain has become flour. Potential has become possibility. Families begin the familiar walk home. The flour they carry will soon become dough. The dough will rise quietly beneath linen cloths. Tomorrow morning, another loaf will emerge from another hearth. Children will tear warm pieces apart with eager hands. Soup will be thickened, porridge enriched, travelers fed. Every bite will begin with this turning wheel beside this quiet stream. Standing here as the shadows lengthen, it becomes clear that the mill was never merely a machine. It was a bridge, a place where months of patient work crossed over into daily nourishment, where flowing water became bread, where invisible labor became visible life. And tomorrow, as autumn edges a little closer and the air begins carrying the faint scent of drying leaves, we'll follow the villagers into one of the busiest and most hopeful times of the entire year, the harvest, when every sickle, every basket, and every helping hand races against the shortening days before winter quietly arrives. There's one morning each year when the village wakes with a different heartbeat. The fire still crackles in every hearth. The rooster still announces the coming day. The mist still gathers above the meadows. And yet, everything feels slightly more urgent, not frantic, not fearful, simply aware, because somewhere beyond the eastern fields, autumn has already begun walking toward the village. You cannot see it yet. The trees are still mostly green. The afternoons remain pleasantly warm. The swallows still dart through the sky, chasing insects above the river. But if you rise before sunrise and stand quietly among the fields, you notice the first whisper change. The morning air feels sharper against your skin. The dew lingers a little longer. The daylight, almost imperceptibly, has begun arriving later and leaving earlier. Nature has not rung a bell to announce the new season. She rarely does. She simply changes one small thing at a time until everyone suddenly realizes that summer has quietly slipped away. For a medieval village, these tiny changes are impossible to ignore. Every shorter evening means fewer hours to work. Every cool breeze reminds of farmers that winter has already started its slow journey south. The harvest cannot wait forever, because frost is wonderfully beautiful and completely indifferent. Walk with me once more toward the fields. Today, they look different. The sea of green that greeted us in spring has become a sea of gold. Wheat heads bow gently beneath the weight of ripe grain. Barley glows like polished bronze in the early sunlight. Even the breeze sounds different now. Instead of whispering through tender young shoots, it rustles across dry stalks ready for cutting. The fields seem to sigh, as though they know their long season of growing has finally reached its ending. The villagers gather quietly, not because anyone commands them, because everyone understands that today matters. Old men arrive carrying sharpening stones. Women balance empty baskets upon their hips. Teenagers carry coils of rope for tying bundles. Children trot proudly beside their parents, each determined to prove they are finally old enough to help. No one stays behind without good reason. Harvest belongs to everyone. The father kneels briefly beside the first row of wheat. He reaches out. His rough fingers gently close around a handful of stalks. For a long moment, he says nothing. Perhaps he offers a silent prayer. Perhaps he simply feels gratitude. After all, he planted these seeds many months ago when snow still lingered in the shadows of hedgerows. He watched spring rains, endured summer heat, pulled weeds, repaired fences, wondered whether storms might destroy everything. Now, the waiting is over. He lifts his sickle. To modern eyes, it seems almost delicate. A curved iron blade, a smooth wooden handle polished by years of use. Nothing about it appears powerful. Yet this simple tool has fed family for generations. The first cut is almost musical. A soft, esthétique. Dry stalks surrender with surprising ease. He gathers another handful. Again, esthétique. Again, one rhythm follows another. Soon dozens of sickles move across the field together. The sounds blend into a gentle chorus. Not loud, not hurried, steady, like rain falling upon leaves. Children move close behind the adults, not cutting, gathering. Every fallen stalk matters. Little hands collect what larger hands leave behind. The youngest boy spots a single ear of wheat lying alone in the stubble. He bends quickly to retrieve it. His mother smiles. Nothing wasted. Only 2 words. Yet they contain an entire philosophy. Nothing wasted. Not grain, not daylight, not effort, not kindness. Every small thing counts. As the morning sun climbs higher, the harvested wheat begins forming neat bundles across the field. Each bundle is tied with a twist of straw rather than expensive rope. Even the plants help bind themselves together. There's quiet elegance in that. The bundles stand upright in little groups, leaning gently against one another. From a distance, they resemble dozens of tiny golden cottages scattered across the landscape. They must remain here for a short while. The breeze and sunshine continue drying them before they are carried away. Harvest is not simply cutting. It is timing. Everything depends upon doing each task at precisely the right moment. Too early, the grain remains damp. Too late, a storm may flatten the crop overnight. No one controls these decisions completely. Experience only improves the odds. A flock of crows lands boldly near the edge of the field. Immediately, the children race toward them, waving their arms. The birds lift into the sky with loud complaints. Everyone laughs. The victory is temporary. Within minutes, the crows return. The contest between farmers and birds has probably existed for as long as people have planted grain. Neither side ever truly wins. Around mid-morning, the women begin carrying full baskets toward waiting carts. The baskets are astonishingly heavy, balanced upon heads, against hips, across shoulders. Each journey leaves faint paths pressed into the dry earth. One woman pauses briefly to rub her lower back, then continues, not because she enjoys discomfort, because the weather has promised only today. Tomorrow remains uncertain. Nearby, two elderly men sharpen sickles beneath the shade of an elm. The sound is soft, steel against stone, back and forth, back and forth. Tiny sparks occasionally flash in the sunlight. One blade after another becomes keen once more. The old men no longer harvest as quickly as they once did. Their knees protest. Their hands tremble slightly. Yet their experience has become just as valuable as youthful strength. A dull blade wastes energy. A sharp one saves hundreds of unnecessary movements. Wisdom often weighs less than muscle, yet carries just as much value. By noon, the field has changed dramatically. Where tall grain stood this morning, only short golden stubble now remains. It is astonishing how quickly months of growing disappear beneath careful hands. The children stand upon one of the loaded wagons, proudly arranging bundles so they will not tumble during the slow journey home. The horse pulling the cart flicks its tail lazily at flies. Unlike the patient oxen used for plowing, this horse seems eager to keep moving. Different animals, different work, different personalities. The villagers know each one well. Lunch today feels almost festive, not extravagant, simply grateful. Fresh bread baked before dawn, cheese, apples, perhaps a little smoked ham if the family has been fortunate. Someone shares a handful of hazelnuts gathered from nearby woods. Another family passes around a jug of weak ale. Food tastes different during harvest, not because the recipes have changed, because satisfaction seasons every bite. The father tears a piece of bread in half. He gives a larger piece to his youngest son without hesitation. The boy notices. Years from now, when he becomes a father himself, he will probably do exactly the same thing. Some traditions are taught without words. As everyone rests beneath the shade of an ancient oak, conversation drifts naturally. Someone remembers a terrible harvest from 15 years ago when endless rain ruined nearly everything. Another recalls the opposite, the wonderful autumn when every barn overflowed and neighbors exchanged songs late into the evening. Memory becomes another farming tool. Past seasons quietly advise future decisions. Then, the wind changes. Not dramatically, only slightly. The father stops chewing. He lifts his head. The others do the same. Far to the northwest, dark clouds are gathering, not the soft summer clouds we watched weeks ago. These are taller, heavier, their undersides almost blue-black. The breeze cools. The wheat still waiting to be cut sways uneasily. No one panics, but everyone rises together. Rest can wait. Rain cannot, without a single shouted order. The field becomes a place of purposeful movement. Sickles flash. Bundles are tied more quickly. Children carry smaller armfuls instead of waiting for larger loads. Neighbors quietly help one another finish difficult corners. No one asks, "Is this your field or mine?" At this moment, the weather belongs to everyone. This is one of the quiet strengths of medieval village life. Competition existed. Disagreements certainly existed. But when the harvest stood beneath threatening skies, cooperation often mattered more than pride. By late afternoon, the final wagon creaks slowly toward the village. The first distant rumble of thunder rolls across the hills just as the last bundles disappear into the safety of the barn. Perfect timing. Or perhaps years of experience recognizing exactly when waiting was no longer wise. The first raindrops begin falling. Large, heavy, slow. They strike the dusty road with tiny dark circles. The villagers stand beneath the barn roof, breathing hard. Their clothes cling damply to tired shoulders. Hands are scratched. Faces glisten with sweat. Every muscle aches. Yet one by one, they begin smiling. Not because the work was easy, because it is finished. The rain that would have ruined the harvest an hour earlier now drums harmlessly upon the roof. Inside the barn, thousands upon thousands of golden grains wait quietly in darkness. Winter has not been defeated. No one in the village would ever speak so confidently. But tonight, they have earned another measure of hope. And hope, in the Middle Ages, was often stored in barns just as surely as grain. As evening settles over the rain-soaked fields, the scent of wet straw, fresh earth, and new-cut wheat fills the cool air. Tomorrow, another important task begins. The grain must be threshed, winnowed, and carefully stored, because harvesting the crop is only half the journey. Keeping it safe until spring, that is a different challenge altogether. The storm has passed, not with a dramatic farewell. No brilliant rainbow stretches across the valley. No triumphant music rises to celebrate the saved harvest. Instead, the rain simply stops. The clouds loosen their grip on the sky. One by one, drops continue falling from the branches of oak and ash trees, landing softly on the earth below. Plink, plink, plink. The village wakes to a world that seems freshly washed. The air feels cooler, cleaner. The smell of damp straw mingles with wet timber and rich black soil. Even the smoke rising from the cottages seems somehow gentler after yesterday's rain. Step outside. Take a slow breath. This is one of those mornings that medieval people would have welcomed with quiet relief. The harvest is safely under cover. Now comes another task, less celebrated, just as important. If harvesting gathers food, threshing and winnowing prepare it for life. Walk toward the great barn standing near the edge of the village. Yesterday it echoed with the creak of wagons arriving one after another. Today it hums with quieter industry. The wide wooden doors stand open. Golden bundles of wheat fill nearly every corner. The smell inside is unforgettable. Dry straw, fresh grain, old wood, a faint hint of dust warmed by the morning sun. It is the smell of security, not complete security. Nothing in the Middle Ages is ever completely certain, but enough to let tired shoulders relax for a little while. Inside, sunlight slips through tiny gaps in the wooden walls. Bright beams stretch across the dim interior. Countless particles of dust float lazily through the light, like tiny stars suspended in the air. If you stand perfectly still, the entire barn seems peaceful. Yet look closer. Everywhere, hands are moving. The father unties one bundle of wheat. He lays the stalks neatly across the hard-packed earthen floor. Beside him rests a tool almost as ancient as farming itself. The flail. It appears wonderfully simple. 2 wooden sticks connected by a strip of leather. Nothing more. No gears. No blades. No complicated mechanism. And yet, for centuries, this humble tool separated grain from straw across much of Europe. He lifts it carefully. The longer handle remains steady in his hands. The shorter striking piece swings freely. Then, whoosh, thump, whoosh, thump. The rhythm begins. The loosen strikes the wheat heads firmly, but not violently. Enough force to free the grain. Not enough to destroy it. Again, whoosh, thump, again. The sound spreads across the barn. Soon several families are working together. Different rhythms blend into one steady heartbeat. Whoosh, thump, whoosh, thump. There's almost music hidden inside repetitive labor. Not because the work is easy, because human beings have always found comfort in shared rhythm. You notice something interesting. No one swings wildly. Every movement is measured. Too much strength wastes energy. Too little leaves grain trapped inside its husk. Experience has quietly taught everyone the perfect balance. The children are helping too, not with the heavy flails. Those require strength and careful control. Instead, they gather loosened straw, into tidy piles. One little girl carefully picks stray kernels from the ground. She crouches patiently, placing each tiny grain into a wooden bowl. You might wonder whether such effort is worthwhile. After all, it is only a few grains. But remember yesterday's lesson. Nothing wasted. A few grains become a handful. A handful becomes another loaf. Another loaf becomes another day without hunger. The mathematics of survival rarely deals in large numbers. Nearby, the grandmother sits upon a low wooden stool. Age has made swinging a flail difficult. Her hands, however, remain wonderfully useful. She examines handfuls of grain one by one, removing bits of broken straw, tiny stones, anything that should not travel into storage. Her eyes have grown older, not less observant. She notices imperfections younger people miss. Sometimes wisdom arrives after strength quietly departs. The youngest children chase one another around stacks of straw. One disappears completely into a towering pile. His sister pretends to search dramatically. Where has he gone? Giggles erupt from somewhere inside the straw mountain. A tiny boot sticks out. Everyone laughs. Even in the busiest seasons, childhood continues finding little places to bloom. At the far end of the barn, another important task is beginning. Winnowing. The word sounds unusual today, yet the process is beautifully simple. Large, shallow baskets are filled with freshly threshed grain mixed with light chaff. The farmer waits. Not every breeze is suitable. He steps outside, lifts one handful, feels the wind against weathered fingertips, then nods. This will do. He raises the basket. With one practiced motion, he tosses the mixture gently upward. For a breathtaking moment, everything hangs suspended. Golden kernels, pale husks, tiny fragments of straw. Then gravity begins its quiet work. The heavier grain falls almost straight back into the basket. The lighter chaff drifts away upon the breeze. Nature finishes what human hands began. Again, the basket rises. The grain falls. The chaff dances away across the yard like tiny pieces of dry paper. No machine hums. No engine roars. Only wind. The same wind that yesterday carried clouds across the valley now helps prepare tomorrow's bread. Nothing in this world works alone. The air itself becomes another worker. The children cannot resist. Soon they are trying to catch the floating chaff. It sticks to their sleeves, their hair, their noses. One sneezes loudly. Another laughs so hard she nearly drops the little basket. The adults smile, but continue working. Joy and labor have never been enemies. Near the doorway, sacks begin filling with clean grain. Each one is tied carefully with braided cord, then marked, not with printed labels. Simple symbols, a family mark, a carved notch, sometimes merely memory. Everyone knows which sacks belong to whom. Trust forms part of the village economy. Not perfect trust. Disagreements happen. Arguments certainly arise. But daily life depends upon believing that neighbors will usually act fairly. Without that belief, a small village could not survive for long. Now, let us climb the wooden ladder into the loft above. Mind your step. The boards creak beneath your weight. Up here, the harvest waits quietly. Rows upon rows of sacks stretch into the shadows. Some filled with wheat, others with rye, others with barley or oats. Together they represent something almost invisible. Time. Each sack contains spring mornings, summer afternoons, autumn evenings, blistered hands, patient hope, countless footsteps between village and field. Months have somehow been folded into grain. Perhaps that is the true miracle of farming. It teaches human beings how to store sunlight. The sun warmed these fields throughout the growing season. The plants captured that energy. Now the harvest carries summer safely toward winter. The villagers could never describe photosynthesis, yet they live by its generosity every day. A tiny mouse darts between two sacks. Immediately, the barn cat notices. She has been waiting patiently all morning. Her body lowers, tail perfectly still, eyes fixed. One graceful leap, the mouse vanishes from sight. The cat returns with quiet satisfaction. No one applauds, yet everyone appreciates her work. Cats are not merely companions here. They guard the harvest as faithfully as any lock or door. One hungry family of mice can consume astonishing amounts of grain during a long winter. Even the smallest hunter serves the village. As afternoon sunlight turns golden, the barn grows warmer. The work slows, not because everything is finished, because people are. The father leans his flail against the wall. He stretches aching shoulders. The grandmother brushes loose straw from her apron. Children sit together eating slices of fresh bread, while tiny sparrows hop hopefully nearby, waiting for forgotten crumbs. Outside, swallows skim low across the fields. The season is changing. Soon they will leave for warmer lands. The villagers do not know where the birds go, only that they always return. Some mysteries remain comfortable, without answers. Standing in the doorway of the barn, looking out across the harvested fields, you realize something gentle. Almost every task we have witnessed so far has shared one quiet purpose: to carry life forward, not dramatically, not heroically, simply faithfully. One loaf, one season, one family, one generation, again and again. And perhaps that steady repetition is what made medieval villages remarkably resilient. Not because life was easy, but because ordinary people became extraordinarily skilled at preparing for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll leave the barns behind and follow the villagers into surrounding forest, a place that was at once pantry, pharmacy, lumberyard, playground, and mystery, where every path disappearing beneath the trees carried both promise and uncertainty. Before there were supermarkets, before there were pharmacies lined with neat shelves, before hardware stores, garden centers, and delivery carts arriving at your door, there was a forest. To modern eyes, a woodland often feels like a place to visit, a peaceful destination for an afternoon walk, a pleasant escape before returning home. To a medieval villager, the forest was part of home. It stood just beyond the last field, breathing quietly in every season, offering gifts with one hand, while hiding dangers behind the other. Come, the morning is cool. Mist still curls between the tree trunks like pale ribbons drifting across the earth. The village disappears behind us with surprising speed. Only a few hundred steps, and familiar sounds begin to fade. The blacksmith's hammer no longer reaches your ears. The chickens fall silent. Even the church bell seems farther away. Instead, another orchestra slowly takes its place. Leaves whisper high overhead. A woodpecker taps patiently against an old oak. Somewhere unseen, a pigeon coos deep within the branches. The breeze carries the earthy fragrance of damp moss, mushrooms, and fallen leaves beginning their slow return to the soil. The forest smells alive. Not sweet, not unpleasant. Simply complete. If you kneel for a moment and place your hand upon the ground, it feels soft beneath your fingertips. Years upon years of fallen leaves have become dark, rich earth. Tiny insects disappear beneath the surface. Fungi quietly weave invisible threads through the soil. Roots stretch in every direction beneath your feet. The villagers know none of the scientific words. Yet they understand something important. A healthy forest gives generously. A sick one grows quiet. The first people entering the woods this morning carry woven baskets. Not axes, not hunting spears. Today is a gathering day. The women spread out slowly, never wandering so far that voices cannot reach one another. One bends beside a patch of wild mushrooms. She does not harvest immediately. Instead, she studies them, very carefully. This mushroom, safe. That one, leave it alone. The knowledge has been earned through generations of careful observation. Not every lesson was painless. Some mistakes were never repeated. A grandmother once taught her daughter. That daughter taught her own children. In this way, entire libraries of woodland knowledge travel without ever being written down. Nearby, a little girl kneels beside a carpet of wild strawberries. They are tiny compared to those in modern gardens. Each berry fits easily upon the tip of her thumb. She picks them one by one, not greedily, patiently, leaving many behind. There will be enough for birds, enough to scatter seeds, enough to return again next summer. Without calling it conservation, the villagers often understand that taking everything today leaves nothing for tomorrow, not because they are perfect caretakers, because experience has taught them what happens when nature is exhausted. A few steps farther, an elderly woman pauses beside a stand of nettles. Most modern walkers avoid them. She smiles instead. With practiced hands, she carefully gathers the young leaves. Cooked properly, nettles become nourishing food rich in vitamins. Their fibers can even be used to make thread. One plant, several purposes. Again, nothing is wasted. The children have discovered hazelnuts scattered beneath a broad hazel tree. The shells crunch pleasantly beneath little boots. Each child fills a small pouch hanging from a leather belt. Some cannot resist cracking one open immediately with a smooth stone. Inside waits the pale nut, sweet, fresh, a tiny reward for curious hands. The youngest boy proudly holds up his collection, perhaps 20 nuts. To him, it feels like a king's treasure. His older sister quietly slips 3 more into his pouch when he isn't looking. She remembers how exciting small victories feel. There is kindness in letting someone believe fortune smiled especially upon them. Now let us follow 2 men carrying axes. The sound of chopping echoes softly through the trees. Not every tree is cut. That would be foolish. Instead, they search for one that is straight, healthy, the right size. Too young, and the timber remains weak. Too old, and rot may already be creeping into the heartwood. The older woodsman walks slowly around an oak. He rests one hand against the rough bark, studies the branches, looks upward through the canopy. He seems almost to be asking permission. Perhaps that sounds poetic. Yet many people living so closely with the land developed a quiet respect for it. Trees require decades to grow. Felling one was never a casual decision. The first swing of the axe rings through the forest. Sharp, clear, then another, with chips scatter across the moss. The fresh-cut oak releases a scent unlike anything else. Warm, almost sweet, clean. Each strike follows the last with patient rhythm. No frantic effort. Steady work accomplishes more than furious work. Eventually, the great tree begins speaking. First a soft creak, then another. The woodsmen stop. Silence. A final groan travels through the trunk. Timber, we might shout today. The medieval woodsmen need no such word. They simply step back. The oak leans, slowly at first, then faster. Its branches brush neighboring trees before settling upon the forest floor with a deep, rolling crash that seems to shake the earth itself. For a few moments afterward, everything becomes strangely quiet. Even the birds pause. It feels almost as though the forest itself is acknowledging what has happened. Soon the work begins again. Branches are trimmed. The trunk is measured. Nothing will be wasted. The straight sections become beams for cottages. Smaller pieces become furniture. Thin branches become fencing. Twigs become kindling. Leaves may even feed livestock. One tree begins many different lives. Meanwhile, farther along the woodland path, smoke curls gently upward from a small clearing. An elderly charcoal burner tends a mound of carefully stacked wood covered with earth and turf. To someone passing by, it might resemble nothing more than a low hill quietly smoking. Inside, wood is slowly transforming into charcoal. The fire burns with very little oxygen, leaving behind fuel that burns hotter and cleaner than ordinary firewood. The blacksmith depends upon it. Without charcoal, there are no sharp plows, no horseshoes, no sturdy nails. The forest quietly supports every other craft in the village. Even people who rarely enter these woods depend upon them every single day. A little farther on, we meet the village beekeeper. His hives are simple woven baskets protected beneath little shelters of straw. The bees move calmly in the cool morning air. Their gentle humming fills the clearing like distant music. Honey is precious, not merely because it tastes sweet. Sugar, as we know it, is rare and expensive. Honey sweetens special meals, preserves fruit, helps soothe sore throats. Wax from the hives becomes candles that bring light into winter evenings. One small insect contributes more to medieval life than most people ever realize. The beekeeper watches the bees with quiet admiration. He knows they cannot be rushed. Flowers bloom according to their own calendar. The bees understand that calendar better than any human. Once again, nature becomes a teacher. As midday approaches, shafts of sunlight break through the canopy, painting golden patches upon the forest floor. The children discover one of those bright circles and immediately begin pretending it is an enchanted island surrounded by dangerous waters. A fallen log becomes a castle wall. A moss-covered stone transforms into a sleeping dragon. Nothing around them has changed, only the story. Perhaps that is another timeless truth. The richest playground has always been imagination. Before returning home, everyone pauses beside a small spring bubbling quietly from beneath limestone rocks. The water is astonishingly clear, cold enough to make your fingers ache. The villagers refill leather flasks, wash dusty hands, rest for a few peaceful minutes. The spring has flowed here longer than memory. Grandparents drank from it. Their grandparents did too. Some places quietly become part of community's identity simply by remaining dependable. The walk back to the village feels heavier, not because anyone is unhappy, because every basket is now filled. Hazelnuts, mushrooms, herbs, bundles of firewood, perhaps a little honey wrapped carefully in wax. The forest has once again shared its quiet generosity. As the cottages reappear beyond the trees, smoke rises lazily into the afternoon sky. The familiar scent of home drifts toward us. Behind us, the woodland settles back into its patient silence, already preparing another season of gifts for those wise enough to gather them with respect. And in our next chapter, we'll visit one of the most fascinating people in the village, the healer, whose knowledge of herbs, wounds, fevers, and simple remedies rested not in grand medical books, but in years of careful observation, compassion, and the remarkable pharmacy growing quietly along every hedgerow and forest path. He knew we were coming long before we saw him. There's another lesson hidden there. People who spend their lives outdoors begin noticing tiny signs. A broken twig, fresh footprints, the alarm call of a blackbird. The forest speaks constantly. Only patient listeners hear its quieter conversations. Back in the village, the healer's small cottage smells unlike any other home. Not because it is cleaner, not because it is richer, because herbs hang everywhere. Bundles of sage dry from dark ceiling beams. Lavender releases its gentle fragrance whenever the door opens. Rosemary, mint thyme, and countless other plants wait patiently upon shelves, tucked inside clay jars, linen bags, and small wooden boxes. The room smells green, fresh, earthy, comforting. Sunlight filters through the tiny window, touching bunches of drying flowers until they glow softly in the dusty air. Nothing here appears mysterious. Everything has a place. Everything has a purpose. Soon, there's a knock at the door. A young mother enters carrying a sleepy little boy. His forehead feels warm. His cheeks are flushed. He has been coughing through the night. The healer kneels so that her eyes meet the child's. She smiles before asking a single question. Fear often grows smaller when someone speaks gently. She places the back of her hand upon his forehead, listens to his breathing, looks at his eyes, asks about his sleep, his appetite, how long the fever has lasted. She is observing carefully, not guessing. Centuries later, doctors would still begin in much the same way, looking, listening, asking. She prepares a warm herbal drink to help comfort him and suggests keeping him warm and encouraging rest. Some remedies available at the time may have offered relief, while others would not have addressed the underlying illness by modern standards. What she offers, above all, is attention. Never underestimate the healing power of someone who stays beside you when you are frightened. After the family leaves, another visitor arrives. This time it is the blacksmith. A shallow cut crosses his palm where rough iron slipped the previous afternoon. The wound is small, but dirty. The healer washes it carefully with clean water before applying a simple dressing made from clean linen and herbs traditionally used for minor wounds. She reminds him to keep the cut as clean as he can. The blacksmith nods. He knows infection is dangerous, even if he cannot see the tiny organisms responsible. Experience has taught him enough. Some wounds heal. Others become angry. No one yet understands exactly why. By late afternoon, the little cottage grows quiet once more. Bundles of fresh herbs now hang beside older ones. The basket sits empty near the doorway. Outside, children chase one another through golden sunlight. A dog sleeps beneath the bench. Someone nearby begins kneading bread. The healer steps outside for a moment. She looks across the village. Smoke rises peacefully from the cottages. The church bell rings once in the distance. The wind carries the scent of fresh-cut hay. She smiles, not because sickness has disappeared. It never does. But because today, everyone who came seeking help has returned home feeling a little less alone. Perhaps that has always been one of the oldest forms of medicine, not only easing pain, but sharing it. And tomorrow, we'll walk toward a village church, not to meet kings or bishops, but to discover how the small parish church quietly shaped the rhythm of ordinary life, marking births, weddings, harvest festivals, and farewells, while its bell measured time for people who owned no clocks at all. Long before people checked the time by glancing at a watch, long before clocks glowed softly from bedside tables, long before phones vibrated gently inside pockets, there was a bell, not a particularly large bell, not the grand bronze giants that later echoed across great cities. Just one weathered church bell hanging inside a modest wooden tower above a small stone chapel. Yet its voice reached every corner of the village. Across fields where farmers bent over their crops. Across woodland paths where children gathered hazelnuts. Across streams where the mill will turn patiently. Across cottages where bread rose quietly beside the hearth. Everyone listened, not because someone ordered them to, because the bell quietly stitched every ordinary life into one shared rhythm. Come, the morning sun has only begun climbing above the trees. A faint mist still lingers over the churchyard. The chapel stands on a gentle rise overlooking the village, as though it has chosen a place where it can watch over everyone equally. Its walls are built from rough local stone. No two blocks are exactly alike. Some are smooth. Others still carry the marks of the chisels that shaped them generations ago. Bright green moss nestles between the lower stones where morning dew lingers longest. The roof is thatched, though patches have been repaired over the years. One section is newer than another, a reminder that even sacred buildings require ordinary maintenance. Nothing escapes time, not even places built for eternity. The heavy wooden door bears countless scratches left by weather, boots, and hands. How many hands? Impossible to know. Thousands. Perhaps tens of thousands. A child once pushed the same door open with muddy fingers. An old woman leaned against it after a long funeral. A nervous young bride paused here before stepping inside. A father carried his newborn through this entrance to be baptized. Every mark in the wood tells a story that no one wrote down. Push gently. The hinges answer with a long, familiar creak. Inside, the world becomes quieter. Not silent, just softer. The thick stone walls swallow much of the outside noise. The air smells faintly of beeswax candles, old timber, cool stone, and a whisper of incense left behind from some earlier service. Sunlight slips through tiny stained glass windows. These windows are far simpler than those in great cathedrals. Small pieces of colored glass held together by strips of lead. Blue, ruby red, gold and amber. The colors spill gently across the worn stone floor like little pools of light. Dust dances lazily through the beams. Wooden benches stand in uneven rows. Many have been repaired more than once. One bears the carved initials of someone who probably should have been listening more carefully during a long sermon many years ago. Even medieval children occasionally became restless. Human nature has always been remarkably consistent. Walk toward the front. There is no magnificent golden altar, no towering marble columns. This is a village church. Simple, humble, built by ordinary people with ordinary means. And perhaps because of that, deeply loved. The priest arrives quietly from a small side room. His robes are clean but plainly mended. His boots carry traces of yesterday's muddy path. He does not resemble the powerful bishops who advise kings. He resembles a neighbor, because that is exactly what he is. He blesses marriages, comforts grieving families, listens to confessions, visits the sick, sometimes teaches children their prayers, occasionally settles disagreements before they become lasting feuds. His life is woven into the same village as everyone else's. Outside, a rope hangs from the bell tower. The sexton, a man responsible for caring for the church and its grounds, wraps both hands around it, then pulls. Far above, the bell swings. A heartbeat later, bong. The sound rolls gently across the valley. Not harsh, Not commanding. Steady, warm. Another pull. Bong. You can almost imagine the villagers hearing it. The blacksmith pauses before striking another piece of glowing iron. A shepherd lifts his head among the sheep. Children stop chasing one another for a brief moment. The women baking bread know roughly how far the morning has progressed. No one checks a clock. The bell is enough. Its voice does not announce minutes. It announces moments. Morning prayer, midday, evening, a wedding, a funeral, a festival, an emergency. The sound itself remains the same. Only its meaning changes. Listen carefully. The village has learned to understand this language without words. Today is not a feast day. Simply an ordinary morning. And perhaps that is exactly why we should stay. History often celebrates extraordinary days. Battles, coronations, royal weddings. Yet most medieval people experienced thousands of perfectly ordinary mornings like this one. Those ordinary mornings built their lives far more than famous events ever did. The first villagers begin arriving. No one rushes. A farmer removes his cap before entering. An elderly woman pauses to catch her breath halfway up the path. Two children whisper until their mother gently reminds them where they are. A dog waits faithfully outside beneath the old yew tree. Even he seems to understand that this is not his place to enter. Inside, everyone knows roughly where they usually sit. Not because seats are assigned, simply because habits become comforting. The widow sits near the front where her hearing is better. The miller's family gathers along one side. The shepherd prefers the back, perhaps because he often arrives a little late after tending the flock. No one comments. Everyone understands. The service begins. The priest speaks in Latin for parts of the ceremony, the language of the church throughout much of medieval Western Europe. Most villagers do not fully understand every word. That might surprise us today. Yet the rhythm itself is familiar. The gestures, the prayers they know by heart, the songs, the moments for standing, kneeling, and quiet reflection. Meaning often arrives through repetition, as much as translation. Then comes the sermon. This part is spoken in the local language. Here the priest speaks about kindness, about honesty in trade, about helping neighbors prepare for winter, about forgiving old arguments before they harden into permanent bitterness. His examples come not from distant kingdoms, but from everyday village life, because wisdom grows best when planted in familiar soil. As the service ends, something interesting happens. Nobody leaves immediately. Instead, the churchyard slowly fills with conversation. This is where news travels. A new baby was born last night. The carpenter has agreed to repair the widow's roof. A traveler passed through yesterday carrying stories from London. Someone's cow has wandered into the North Meadow again. Children dart between the gravestones, laughing until gently reminded to be respectful. Old friends stand beneath the shade of a yew tree. Continuing conversations interrupted yesterday evening. The church is more than a place of worship. It is also the village's meeting place. Its notice board, its gathering hall, its shared memory. Walk with me toward the edge of the churchyard. The oldest gravestones lean gently now. Many are simple. Some are little more than weathered crosses. The names carved upon them have softened beneath centuries of rain. Some can no longer be read at all. Yet each stone marks someone who once walked these same lanes. Someone who harvested these same fields. Heard the same bell. Watched children play beneath the same oak. History often remembers kings by name. Villages remember grandparents by stories. And stories can be just as enduring. A little boy wanders over with his grandfather, who is buried here. The old man smiles. I never met him. The boy looks puzzled. Then how do you know about him? Because my grandfather told me. The child thinks about that for a long moment. Without realizing it, he has just witnessed history being passed from one generation to the next. Not through books, through conversation, through memory, through love. As afternoon sunlight stretches long across the churchyard, the bell rings once more. Its familiar voice drifts gently across the rooftops. People begin returning to their work. The blacksmith relights his forge. The baker checks her loaves. Children resume their games. Life flows onward, just as it always has. The church grows quiet again, waiting patiently for tomorrow, for another wedding, another baptism, another harvest Thanksgiving, another farewell. The little bell will continue measuring lives not by hours, but by moments that matter. And in our next chapter, we'll step beyond the village boundaries to follow a traveling merchant whose arrival transforms an ordinary day into an event filled with curiosity, rare goods, distant stories, and the exciting realization that even this tiny medieval village is connected to a much larger world beyond the horizon. Next, there are days when nothing unusual happens. The rooster crows, the bread rises, the mill wheel turns, children chase one another beneath the old ash tree, the blacksmith's hammer keeps its familiar rhythm, the church bell marks another ordinary morning, and no one minds. For most medieval villagers, ordinary days were not something to escape. They were something to protect. Routine meant stability. Stability meant food. Food meant another season together. But every so often, something broke that beautiful rhythm. Not with danger, not with war, not with disaster, with curiosity. Long before the village sees him, they hear him, not his voice, his horse, the slow clop, clop, clop of iron shoes striking the hard-packed road, mixed with the gentle squeak of wooden wheels that have traveled far more miles than anyone in this village ever will. The sound arrives faintly over the hills. A shepherd pauses. The dog beside him lifts its ears. At the mill, the apprentice glances toward the road without quite realizing why. Children stop arguing over whose stick horse runs fastest. The village is listening. The traveler has not yet appeared. Already, he has everyone's attention. Walk toward the crossroads. The road itself is little more than two worn tracks pressed into the earth by countless carts before this one. Rain has filled yesterday's wheel ruts with tiny pools of water. Wildflowers lean gently along the edges where wagons seldom pass. Then, around a bend between two ancient oaks, the cart appears. It is smaller than you expected. The horse pulling it is gray with age. Not magnificent. Not particularly fast. Its mane hangs untidily over one eye. Its shoulders carry the quiet strength of an animal that has spent years walking from village to village. The merchant pats its neck affectionately. You've earned your oats tonight. Perhaps he says it aloud. Perhaps only with a gentle smile. Either way, the horse seems to understand. The cart itself is a fascinating collection of ordinary treasures. Bundles wrapped in linen. Small wooden chests secured with leather straps. Coils of rope. Barrels. A folded canvas stretched carefully over the most valuable goods. Nothing sparkles from a distance. Nothing shouts for attention. This is not the wealth of kings. It is the practical wealth of everyday life. By the time the cart reaches the village square, half the children have already gathered. Not touching, just looking. Looking as only children can, with complete and joyful concentration. The merchant laughs. I haven't even stopped yet. The youngest boy circles the wagon twice, trying to peek beneath the canvas without actually lifting it. His sister gently pulls him back. Wait! Waiting is difficult when the unknown has finally arrived. Adults appear more slowly, not because they are less curious, because curiosity has learned patience. The blacksmith wipes soot from his hands before walking over. The baker brushes flour from her apron. The priest arrives with an easy smile. Even the grandmother leaves her spinning wheel for a little while. Visitors matter, especially visitors carrying news. The merchant climbs carefully from a wagon. His boots are dusty. His cloak bears patches stitched in several different colors. The hem has been repaired so many times that it has become a little history book of its own. His beard is neatly trimmed despite weeks upon the road. He carries himself with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to meeting strangers. Travel teaches certain skills. One of them is learning how to smile before speaking. His first task is not selling. It is greeting. He knows names, or enough of them. Thomas. Good harvest. Margaret. Your youngest must be walking by now. The villagers seem pleasantly surprised. Then they remember. He passed through last year, and perhaps the year before. In a world where many people never travel beyond neighboring villages, a traveling merchant becomes a living thread connecting distant places. Finally, The canvas is folded back. The children lean forward almost in unison. Inside, the world becomes larger. There are iron needles, finer than those made locally. Bright ribbons dyed richer shades of blue and red than most villagers have ever seen. Small mirrors backed with polished metal. Tiny glass beads catching sunlight like drops of frozen rain. Sharp knives from another town. Better whetstones. Bundles of salt wrapped carefully against moisture. Perhaps a little pepper. Only a very little. Enough to smell. Not enough for ordinary families to buy easily. Spices have traveled astonishing distances. Across seas. Across mountains. Through markets filled with languages no one here has ever heard. Imagine that for a moment. A pinch of pepper sitting quietly upon this cart may have begun its journey thousands of miles away. The villagers do not know every step of that journey. They only know it tastes wonderfully different. The merchant carefully unwraps a bolt of cloth. The color is extraordinary. A deep blue, almost the color of the evening sky, just after sunset. The women gather closer, not reaching, simply admiring. Beautiful cloth is expensive. Looking costs nothing. The merchant notices. He smiles. Feel. One woman hesitates, then gently brushes a fabric with 2 fingertips. Her expression changes immediately. Softer, smoother than homespun wool. For one quiet moment, she imagines making a Sunday dress from such cloth. She probably never will. Dreams are free. That matters too. Nearby, the blacksmith studies several iron tools. He lifts one, balances it thoughtfully, runs his thumb carefully along the edge. Good craftsmanship recognizes good craftsmanship. The merchant says little. He does not need to. The tool speaks for itself. Trade often begins with trust. A young boy has discovered something entirely different. A tiny wooden whistle carved in the shape of a bird. The merchant blows gently. A perfect bird song fills the square. Immediately, 3 real sparrows answer from the church roof. The children burst into laughter. The boy begs his mother with wide, hopeful eyes. She smiles. Perhaps, if the eggs sell well this week. Perhaps. Sometimes a promise is enough. Business moves slowly. No one rushes. People compare, ask questions, exchange news, sometimes trade without coins. A basket of cheese, a length of woven cloth, a bundle of cured hides, a sack of barley. Money exists, but barter remains wonderfully practical. Each agreement ends not with printed receipts, but with handshakes and reputations carefully built over many years. As the afternoon warms, the merchant becomes something even more valuable than a shop. He becomes a storyteller. Someone asks about London. Another wonders whether the king is truly preparing for war. Someone else asks whether the great cathedral in York is really as enormous as travelers claim. The merchant settles comfortably upon an overturned barrel. Children gather at his feet. Adults stand behind them. Even people pretending not to listen somehow drift a little closer. He speaks of towns where streets are crowded from dawn until darkness, of ships larger than any village barn, of markets filled with oranges from warmer lands, of bridges built from solid stone stretching across rivers wider than the village meadow. The listeners fall completely silent, not because they doubt him, because they are trying to imagine such places. For many villagers, these stories become their only window into the wider world. Maps are rare. Books are rarer still. Travelers carry geography inside their memories. The merchant also carries warnings. A bridge washed away after heavy spring floods. A sickness reported in one distant town. Bandits seen along a northern road. Information travels slowly in the Middle Ages. Yet it travels, one conversation at a time. One village after another. One traveler after another. As evening approaches, several small purchases have changed hands. Needles, salt, a ribbon, a knife, a child's whistle. Nothing extravagant. Everything useful. The merchant carefully covers his remaining goods once more. Tomorrow, another village waits beyond the hills. The children wave enthusiastically as he climbs back onto the cart. The gray horse snorts softly, almost impatient to continue. The wheels begin turning again. Clop, clop, clop. The sound gradually fades into the distance until only birdsong remains. The village feels strangely larger now. Nothing has physically changed. The cottages remain where they were. The fields still stretch toward the horizon. The church bell still hangs patiently in its tower. Yet every person carries away a tiny piece of somewhere else. A story, a rumor, a new tool, a different idea. The world beyond the hills suddenly feels a little less mysterious. Perhaps that was the merchant's greatest gift, not the goods inside his cart, but the reminder that every quiet little village, no matter how distant it seemed, was connected by dusty roads to an astonishingly vast world. And in our next chapter, as winter finally begins whispering across the fields, we'll discover how medieval families prepared their cottages for the coldest months of the year, when warmth became precious, daylight grew short, and survival depended not on speed or strength, but on everything they had quietly prepared throughout the seasons.